Chief Meteorologist Trent Eric.
Yeah, Lori and Jen, we're looking at the remnants of Emily. Now, if you missed the 6 o'clock news earlier this evening or haven't heard, at 5 o'clock this evening, the National Hurricane Center issued the last advisory on Emily as the aircraft had been out there all day long looking for a center of circulation and winds that met the definition of a tropical storm. They simply could not find it. So the last advisory was written unless the system regenerates. And that's the big question here tonight, is what's going to happen to perhaps the mid-level circulation as it exits the northern coastline here of the island of Hispaniola. The National Hurricane Center tonight is giving that a 60% chance of happening over the next 2 days. So it still bears watching, as right here is South Florida, here's the Bahamas, and we would watch the mid-level circulation perhaps strengthen back down to the surface. It definitely is likely. We've seen it happen before, but for now, Emily is no longer. And we're on our 5th named storm of the year, and we have a lot of the season to go. And today, the NOAA and yesterday, Dr. Gray and Dr. Klotzbach update their numbers. Max, bring us up to speed there on what they saw.
Well, we're glad to see that last advisory on Tropical Storm Emily, but not so happy to see some of these new updated seasonal forecasts. And the last couple of days here, we've had updates. Drs. Klotzbach and Gray from Colorado State are sticking with their numbers of 16 named storms, 9 hurricanes, 5 major hurricanes. Today, NOAA came out with their seasonal outlook. They've actually bumped the numbers of storms and hurricanes up, calling for 14 to 19 named storms, 7 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 5 major hurricanes. Basically, the bottom line here is that both of those numbers are well above the averages of 11, 6, and 2. We need to remember that the active part of the hurricane season is really the middle of August to the end of October. We have a lot of season left to go. Trent?
Yeah, Max, we definitely do. And the big question is, what will Emily bring towards us, or the remnants here as we head towards the weekend? We'll talk about your local forecast, but don't forget, anytime you want to check on the tropics or the radar, it's always there, justweather.com. Lord.
You're watching Local 10, home of Local10.com. WPLG Local 10 News at 11 starts now.
We begin tonight with the tropics, where it is getting busy out there, and we now have the 8th named storm of the season, Tropical Storm Harvey.
And even more important for us, there's a wave to watch that by next week could be getting closer to South Florida. Let's begin our coverage with meteorologist Scott Paget, who's in for Trent tonight.
Thanks, Lori. And Calvin, we don't have to worry about Harvey here in South Florida. I want to point that out first, because the center of circulation is 746 miles south-southwest of Miami, moving to the west at 9. It has increased in strength, though. Winds now sustained at 60. Gusting up to 70 miles per hour. And looking at the satellite information, we see a lot of thunderstorm activity with it, but we switched right over to the forecast to show you that we're going to continue to watch Harvey make its way from east to west. Belize under a tropical storm warning, and some of the forecast intensity says it might increase to possibly a hurricane. So we'll watch this as we go through the next couple of days. But what we really are watching is a strong tropical wave that now is east of the Lesser Antilles. And with that in mind, National Hurricane Center now has this in the high category of formation potential, with a 60% chance of developing into a tropical system during the next couple of days. So if that does happen, this is what the forecast models are looking at, making its way off towards the west-northwest and about 5 days out, still in the same general area, maybe right over the east side of Cuba, pushing its way off towards the west and to the northwest. But when you break down some of the better models, this green line here, which is the global forecasting system model, it does put it closer towards the south side of Cuba by Wednesday afternoon. From there, we do take a look at the hurricane weather research and forecasting model, which is this orange line that pulls it a little bit further off towards the north and the east. But the consensus, or the average between some of the best models, still has it making its way off towards the west-northwest, and by Wednesday afternoon possibly sitting right near the east side of Cuba, which is close. So that's definitely something that we want to watch. But what will steer these systems, and what can we expect from that? For more, we turn to Max. Max.
Well, I think we do have to watch this tropical wave because many of the computer models are showing it developing, although they don't really develop it until it gets into the northeastern Caribbean. Now, the steering currents, right now we have this tropical low pressure along and off the eastern seaboard, but with time, that tropical low pressure lifts out to the north, and we end up with a ridge of high pressure that's going to look something like this. And that ridge is going to steer our little disturbance here, the tropical wave, into the Caribbean, and in about 5 days' time be located somewhere near Cuba. But what is likely going to happen, that ridge breaks down. So whether that allows it to turn up a little bit more to the north or not, we're not sure. We've got plenty of time to watch this, but I just don't want anybody to be surprised if we do end up in this cone of uncertainty sometime over the weekend.
And again, it's something, of course, we don't want to happen, something that possibly could happen. From there, we turn our attention also to the East Atlantic, where there's another tropical wave coming also off of the coast of Africa in the medium chance of formation potential with a 40% chance of development. So a lot going on in the tropics. Of course, our whole entire weather team will be on top of it, and the latest information is on Just Weather.
Hey there, and welcome to Weather Center Live. I'm Paul Goodlow along with Kim Cunningham here in the studio, and we have a lot to talk about tonight. The first thing is Tropical Storm Irene, and it is a threat to the Caribbean as well as the southeastern United States. We'll have all the details coming up in just a few minutes. But speaking of the tropics, we also had Tropical Storm Harvey made landfall earlier today in Belize, and definitely bringing the threat of more heavy and flooding rain there as well. But let's talk about what could be our first hurricane of the season. Kim Cunningham is tracking Irene.
All right, Paul, take a look at this, and you can see this big cluster of clouds right here. This is Irene. Here's the very latest, the 11 o'clock update. We should be getting one around 2 a.m. from the National Hurricane Center. The pressure, 1,006 millibars. Reconnaissance was out there. They'll be back again tomorrow. The Hurricane Hunters will be back out there again tomorrow checking this out. But it's moving west at 22 miles per hour, so pretty quickly through the Lesser Antilles. Okay, this is the Caribbean right in here. Now, the forecast track does take it towards, looks like Puerto Rico with tropical storm warnings in effect, which means we could see tropical storm conditions within the next 24 hours. So preparations should be made now, maybe for some heavy rain, maybe 4 to 7 inches of rain in some areas. So we're going to watch this moving off towards the west, and then slowly more of a turn towards the right. At least right now, it's what models are indicating right now, and becoming a hurricane by maybe sometime Monday, early afternoon or into the evening hours. So this is going to strengthen. Interaction with land, though, may weaken it a little bit. Again, too early to call completely on this. We want you to, of course, tune back in over the next couple of days. Midweek for sure, folks in the U.S. should be watching this here in Florida and the Gulf of Mexico. So strengthening is forecast, interacts with land maybe over Hispaniola, and then over Cuba could weaken it as well. But if it gets out in the Gulf of Mexico, that could be something we need to really watch for strengthening. And if you're in South Florida, at least right now is the time to start thinking and keeping an eye on this. Paul, we have some other problems, though. We could see
Tropical storm Irene. Right now, the Virgin Islands are getting the brunt of Irene's drenching rains and heavy winds as the storm barrels towards Puerto Rico. Irene is getting stronger tonight. South Florida remains in the cone while the storm heads in our general direction. CBS 4 Chief Meteorologist David Bernard is joining us with the 11 o'clock advisory that already came in. What did it say, David?
Well, Cynthia, a lot of information to impart tonight. The first one is that Irene is quite a bit stronger. It's close to a hurricane tonight with 70-mile-per-hour winds. It's closing in on Puerto Rico as we speak. It's only 50 miles southeast of San Juan, and it's moving to the west at 15 miles per hour. Now, let's take a look at the future track. Over the next 36 to 48 hours, it's going to track over or close to the Dominican Republic, and then possibly through the Turks and Caicos and southeast Bahamas. And then as it reemerges in the central Bahamas in the next 48 to 60 hours, there is the possibility that Irene could be a hurricane. Again, this would be during the day on Wednesday. Then that's when things could start going down here in South Florida if we are in the middle of this cone as projected right now. By Thursday, again, we could be looking at a Category 1 storm, potentially stronger than that, somewhere in the South Florida region. And remember, when we talk about the cone, it's even chances. The storm could be here, the storm could be over here, or the storm could be there. It could be anywhere in that yellow shaded area. You shouldn't focus on this one point. And then beyond that, as you go into Friday, a turn more to the north is expected. Now, that's the big question, when that turn is going to occur. More on that in just a second. But right now, what we're looking at are hurricane warnings for Puerto Rico, hurricane warnings for the Dominican Republic, tropical storm warning in effect for Haiti. Now, for the Turks and Caicos and southeast Bahamas, we have tropical storm warning, but now we've upgraded to hurricane watch for the central Bahamas. No watches for South Florida right now, and no watches currently for Nassau or the northwestern Bahamas. All right, let's take a take a look at computer models, and I want to show you these because I know a lot of you look at these at home on your computer and on the internet, and I want to explain what's going on tonight. As we go through tomorrow and Tuesday, the computer models are in strong agreement that the storm tracks over or near the Dominican Republic. If it goes just north of the Dominican Republic like that, the storm will be a lot stronger. If it goes along the south end of these tracks, the storm is going to be a lot weaker. Now, as we go into Wednesday and Thursday, notice that the models are turning. The question is, does it turn east of our coast or as it approaches the coast? It is too early to say, and that's why we're in the cone. Look at the satellite picture tonight, and the last few frames really show the storms exploding. In fact, there's the center, and where you see the blues and purples, those are intense thunderstorms indicating that we do have a strengthening storm tonight. But let's take a look at this picture. Here's the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Again, here's where the storm is now with Puerto Rico. You can see those intense storms located with it. But we talked about this during Emily. And the reason if the storm goes over the Dominican Republic, it could weaken is because some of the mountain peaks there are up to 10,000 feet high. And they have a history of tearing the storms apart. But if it stays just to the north of there, then we're going to be looking at a much stronger system. So here's the key. Here's the jet stream pattern tonight. We have a jet stream dip over the east coast and a blocking high north of the storm right now. That's going to keep the storm going to the west or the west-northwest the next couple of days. But as we get into Wednesday, that's the critical time. Is this jet stream dip strong enough to pull Irene to the north and it stays east of Florida? Or does this blocking high come in and it pushes it toward the coastline? Tonight, Cynthia, we don't have the answers to that, but we are in the cone and we need to stay vigilant. I'll have more in a few.
It is 50 past the hour. It's time for your tropical update. We bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knapp, for the very latest on Hurricane Irene, which became a hurricane with the latest advisory. Dr. Knapp, what do you see playing out today?
Well, today it's going to move away from Puerto Rico, and it might strengthen some because it'll be over water for a while. But then when we get into tonight and tomorrow, it'll be tangling to some extent with Hispaniola. That will have a big impact on how strong it gets down the road. So let's look at the particulars right now. It's a Category 1 hurricane with maximum winds at 75 miles per hour. It's been moving over Puerto Rico overnight, and now it's starting to move away. As you see on the radar here, here is the developing eye and eye wall. It's really starting to take on a more symmetric shape as it gets away from land. So I would anticipate some strengthening today, and eventually as the day goes on, the conditions will improve in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, but then it will start to go downhill in Hispaniola as the system moves west-northwestward in the general direction of the northern coast of the Dominican Republic, where there is a hurricane warning in effect. Looking big picture, this is the water vapor imagery to give you an idea of what's going on in the middle to upper levels of the atmosphere. Not only do you see Irene down here with the well-established upper level outflow, no wind shear hammering it to tear apart the thunderstorms. You also see this dip in the jet stream coming into the northeastern U.S. That is going to weaken the ridge and allow Irene to move more and more of a turn to the right, and that's what's going to open the door for it to come toward the southeastern United States. Here's the water temperatures, and boy, it's a lot of fuel that Irene has to tap into as it moves north of Hispaniola and Cuba, and even if it were to stay just offshore of Florida, for example, it would be a lot of warm water in the Gulf Stream. So there's a lot of fuel. The big X factor is how much land interaction between now and when it gets near or over parts of the U.S. So let's talk about that. The Hurricane Center forecasts a hurricane the entire way through the 5-day period, going near or over the Dominican Republic northern coast over the next day or so. Then it should emerge north of Cuba sometime mid to late week, and as early as Wednesday evening you could start to see some impacts in southeastern Florida. We could even have a hurricane watch issued as early as tonight or tomorrow morning. Then when we get into Thursday, in late Thursday into early Friday, we could have a system either just offshore or over Florida, and then points north need to watch it as well. Again, Hurricane Center forecasting gradual strengthening throughout this period. Now, land interaction is going to be a big factor here, critical to intensity over the next couple of days during the early part of the week. If the system spends more time over Hispaniola and Cuba, this southern track means less strengthening in the short term, but if it gets north of Hispaniola quickly, it could strengthen quite a bit. Some of the models are over Hispaniola and Cuba. Some of them are farther to the north and east. Now, our threat level graphic has been updated. You can keep updated with this online through my social media on Twitter and Facebook. What we've done is we've added a high threat level along the coastal areas from Florida to the Carolinas, and that's to give you an idea that given all the uncertainties and track and intensity, folks in that area should be on high alert. We will be updating that as the days go on. Mike?
With that.
All right, George and Maribel, Hurricane Irene continues to become better organized and strengthened. And in fact, right now, the big change with the latest 11 a.m. advisory is that the Hurricane Center is forecasting Irene to strengthen into a major Category 3 hurricane, possibly by Thursday morning. But let's focus in on what's happening right now. Here you can see it's located 110 miles west-northwest of San Juan, Puerto Rico, with max sustained winds of 80 miles per hour and moving towards the west-northwest at 13 miles an hour. Right now, forecast to move just to the north of Hispaniola, and it's going to be moving over very warm waters that will allow it to continue to intensify, possibly moving towards Turks and Caicos as we head into tomorrow morning, and thereafter likely moving towards the southeastern Bahamas as a Cat 2, potentially a Cat 3 Thursday around 8 a.m. That's what the meteorologists at the Hurricane Center are expecting. But the big question is, when will it turn? All depending, of course, on the weather pattern and whether a trough moves in to help lift it to the north or push it towards the north and east. Right now, Florida, we're still included in that cone, and there's still a lot of uncertainty. A lot can change over the next couple of days, and this is the reason why we really need to make sure that we are prepared, that you have your plan, your supplies in place. Even as we head into Thursday, Friday, right now there's a potential that this hurricane, possibly Category 3, could be moving up the eastern seaboard towards Georgia or the Carolinas, and there's a lot of concern. In fact, right now we're already seeing that this storm continues to strengthen due to the deep purples and reds indicating strong thunderstorms. Already the rain bands impacting our friends down in the Dominican Republic, and right now hurricane warnings in effect for Puerto Rico, north coast of Dominican Republic. We have a tropical storm warning in effect for the south coast of DR and Haiti, and also a change in the newest advisories that a hurricane warning has now been issued for Turks and Caicos, southeast Bahamas, and a hurricane watch is in place for the central Bahamas. So here are the things that you need to do to
It is now 50 past the hour. It's time for a tropical update, and also means it's time for an intermediate advisory. It appears we now have a Category 2 hurricane on our hands this evening. The pressure down to 982 millibars from 988. What that means is we've actually lost pressure. We've actually seen the pressure come down, and that means the storm is intensifying. And as we kind of close in on it here, what you're looking at, of course, right in this region and through here, again, is that center of circulation. Now, the forecast track doesn't change in this advisory. If they're going to make changes with it, that'll be during the 11 o'clock advisory, so we'll wait on that. But again, what you can see here certainly is a storm that has a lot of deep thunderstorms around the convection. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever seen this light blue color that you see right in through here. And there could certainly be, as we go through the overnight hours, an eye trying to develop with this. Reports from, again, the Air Force Reserve Hurricane Hunter aircraft. Irene has strengthened. It is now a Category 2 hurricane with max sustained winds at 100 miles per hour. So there it is. Actually 981. They must have made a pass between now and when I got that vortex message. All right, 215 miles to the southeast of Grand Turk Island. Our biggest fear starting to come true here. We have an intensifying hurricane as this continues to push off toward the north and west. Again, underneath all this deep purple is where we have the center. And when you have the center co-located with the deepest convection, you've got yourself an intensifying hurricane. And unfortunately, with what we see so far from some of these breathing channels, what we call these outflow channels, especially the eastern channels, and now a little bit better southern channel starting to show up. This thing has every ability to become a Lance Armstrong should it want to. So that's what we're looking at and through here. Let's go on and show you the rest of the graphics package here. Obviously, hurricane warnings are posted for many of the all the Turks and Caicos, including the central Bahamas as well. Hurricane watches will be north of that. And our steering flow is really going to be key as we go through the next 48 hours or so, because we're going to see it start to make that turn. Where does it make it? Does it make it farther west? Does it make it farther east? It has a chance to make it farther east if it undergoes rapid intensification. And all the computer models that look at intensification actually say, hey, this thing could rapidly intensify. We may see the beginning signs of that happening right now. By the time we work our way into the midweek, this trough comes in, begins to lift on out. We know that's going to take it toward the coast, but then does it landfall, come north, head back to the coastline again as this next high builds over? There's so many unanswered questions even once this moves past the Carolinas. That's why we're telling everybody on the eastern seaboard to be ready for this thing. Again, latest model guidance that we have. Again, pay attention to this TVCN, which is kind of a culmination of all the models in through here, but don't log out and say, oh goodness, the HWRF or the GFDL, which are these two models here, mean nothing, because these are actually models that are run for hurricanes. They're made specifically for hurricanes. They're high resolution models. And, you know, they're very much outliers, as you can see from what we've got going on here. But I wouldn't rule them out just yet. I want to see what happens when we get that new data from the Hurricane Hunter aircraft into these models. If they shift with everybody else, okay, great. Now everybody's on the same page. But until they do that, I can't take Florida out of the woods. All right, notice again, Puerto Rico just getting lambasted with rain. Storm's still moving away, but we're getting all these bands just feeding into the storm. This is what's helping to feed into this center, which, as you can see, is blowing up by the minute here. Notice again, winds not too strong, at least near the shorelines from what we're seeing. But out in the middle of this, the aircraft measuring winds, again, to enough to give us a 100-mile-per-hour Category 2 hurricane. Remember, 115 is Cat 3 status. It's going to go up from there, unfortunately. Look at the wave action. When you've got a big wind field like we have here, winds coming out of the east across the water, look at the wave setup. Huge. Not too bad now the farther north we go. This will probably reach the coast first. But as we move south toward the core of this, 22-foot waves heading toward the Turks and Caicos. What is normally 3 to 5 feet on a given trade wind day is going to be 22 feet. That is huge. And you know what? As the storm grows, so does the waves. And so we're very concerned, obviously, about major wave action coming into the Bahamas. So if you live, again, anywhere here from Grand Turk on northward to Abaco, Grand Bahama Island, Nassau, you need to keep an eye on this storm, because not only is it going to be a wind threat, unfortunately, it is going to be a wave threat as well as we go through the next 48 to 60 hours. Guys?
And we have continuing coverage of what is now
tracking Hurricane Irene, now a Category 2 storm. And tonight we have the new 11 o'clock advisory with the latest on where the system is headed next.
The size of the hurricane is massive, as you can tell by this NASA picture, a system that has strengthened faster than expected.
And while it's quiet in the Bahamas tonight, the islands could see a direct hit from this hurricane. Now, Irene is north of the Dominican Republic tonight after leaving Puerto Rico soaked.
And it is intensifying over open water. Let's get right to the latest information from that 11 p.m. advisory. Hurricane specialist Max Mayfield's been watching this storm all day, along with our chief meteorologist, Trent Eric. So, Trent, start us off.
Yeah, we literally have had this advisory in our hand for just a couple of minutes. It came in a little late here tonight from the National Hurricane Center. What we're looking at as of 11 o'clock, 831 miles to the east-southeast of Miami. The winds are at 100 miles per hour, gusting to 120. The movement is west-northwest here at 12 miles per hour. Pressure at 980 millibars. It became a Category 2 storm this evening in between the 5 and 11 o'clock. A special advisory was issued at 8 o'clock from the National Hurricane Center as the Air Force reconnaissance flight found that it had winds of 100 miles per hour, so therefore bumped to a Category 2. You can see the flare-up in convection with this storm as it's just north here of the Dominican Republic. There it is, 122 miles per hour. That is measured at about 10,000 feet or 700 millibars. So you extrapolate down to the surface, and therefore a Category 2 storm. The hurricane hunters have been in and out of the system throughout the night. As far as the forecast track here, there have been some changes, and basically with intensity. 8 o'clock Tuesday, a major hurricane, a Category 3 in the southeastern Bahamas near the Turks and Caicos. It will continue to strengthen into a Category 3 here 8 a.m. on Wednesday, and eventually a Category 4. That is a big change here since 5 o'clock at its closest approach to South Florida. Again, this is Thursday evening at 8 o'clock, and then continuing to move to the north, weakening somewhat before making landfall somewhere possibly here on the southeastern coastline of the United States. Now, as far as a closer up look, you can see the Category 4. There is Nassau, so the track takes it just to the east of that island. South Florida definitely still in the forecast track. Now, Max, what else are we looking at here as far as the system and what we're expecting with the environment around it?
Well, this is still a tricky forecast for something paralleling the coast of Florida like this. And for days and days, we've had this ridge of high pressure steering it west-northwestward across the Atlantic around these high pressure centers. But look at how narrow this ridge is here. That ridge is going to weaken over the next day or so. This high in the eastern Atlantic is moving westward, and that high is going to help steer that towards the north here by Wednesday and Thursday. And here we are by Thursday. But exactly how strong that ridge is out there to the east, we're not absolutely sure. NOAA has this jet aircraft that flies at about 43,000 feet. They took off at 2 p.m. today from MacDill Air Force Base. They've been out there all afternoon. This evening, they're releasing these little instruments that drop down to the surface. They report pressure, temperature, humidity, and wind every half a second. And then all that data gets into the computer model. So the models that, and I should say too, that jet will go back to Tampa and get a new flight crew. They're going to take off at 2 a.m. to go back into the hurricane in the morning. So that data gets into that forecast will be issued tomorrow at 5 a.m. We'll have more confidence in that forecast.
So that one will be a little more important. So let's take a look at the wind field here tonight at the 11 o'clock advisory. The tropical storm force winds here in the yellow. The hurricane force winds do not go away. There's just no skill out 8 o'clock on Wednesday. So the National Hurricane Center drops those from the forecast. But you can see on its closest approach to South Florida, this is 8 o'clock on Thursday. The tropical storm force winds are forecast near Miami-Dade and Broward counties. Let's take a little closer look here, and you can see that wind field. And bottom line, we're talking about the probability of the tropical storm force winds here across South Florida. Max, what do those numbers look like with the 11 o'clock advisory?
Well, if we take a look here just in Florida, 62% Palm Beach, 49% Miami, much lower down the Keys here, but those are pretty high probabilities to be this far out. So, you know, we're talking close to the point approach on Thursday. Hurricane Center likes to give 48 hours notice for the watch. We could still have a tropical storm watch issued tomorrow. Calvin, Lori.
All right.
Well, all week long, the Weather Channel, the place to be as we follow a hurricane, and 10 before the top of the hour means it is our official tropical update.
Yeah, we're talking about Irene, so let's bring in Carl Parker and Dr. Rick Knabb. And guys, who's going to get hit first here?
Well, it looks like the Turks and Caicos are going to get hit, and you know, we've been talking a lot about the potential U.S. impacts, but there are some areas that are definitely going to be raked by the storm, unfortunately.
Yeah, and interestingly, the last time the U.S. got hit by Hurricane Ike in 2008, that storm hit the southeastern Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, about a week earlier as a major hurricane. So those areas about to get struck again, it appears.
That's right. And as we look at the visible picture right now, it's still a Category 2 storm. It looks like we're seeing an eye developing.
We sure do. There were hints of it earlier, but now it's really starting to become apparent. And we knew that was coming because some of the aircraft data, the microwave data that we looked at earlier today suggested it had an eye, and that's forming. But now look what's going to happen. The northern eye wall is about to go into the Turks and Caicos right here, and then into Little Inagua, Great Inagua later. So same areas that got hit by Ike about 3 years ago, about to really get hammered again. And it might be a Category 3 hurricane, major hurricane, before it gets there.
And we've been seeing some inflow on the south side, some drier air potentially coming in with Hispaniola. That's no longer going to be a factor.
No, and obviously the satellite trends here show that the hurricane doesn't seem to care a whole lot that there's a big mountainous island to its south. It appears to be strengthening nonetheless. And by the way, Puerto Rico is still getting hammered with some nasty rain bands off to the southeast.
Yeah, at least not a lot of wind there in Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, but there's this huge wind field on the north and east side, and that's already generating some very high waves.
Yeah, not a surprise. You know, the waves get higher the longer the wind blows over a longer distance and the stronger the winds get. So what's been happening is winds out of the southeast for a couple days now, and that's just churning up the ocean. And keep in mind, this is going to be a problem for the U.S. East Coast from Florida to Maine. Even if you don't get the hurricane itself, you're going to get waves and rip currents.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as we look at the new model runs here, I think people sometimes are tempted to say, oh, well, look, it's going to be offshore now. That's not necessarily the case. We see them go back and forth all the time.
Yeah, the models like to do sometimes what we call windshield wipering, going back and forth. We've seen that in the last couple of days. Now, one thing I want to highlight is the fact that these model runs do not benefit from the direct input of data from the NOAA G4 jet that flew early this morning and that flew last night. We're in between those cycles.
Right.
But the model runs that we're going to see this afternoon that you'll be able to show everyone will have the G4 jet data that got into those models this morning. It will affect the 5 p.m. advisory from the Hurricane Center's track as well.
And it could very well trend back to the west when that happens. So we're talking about, again, a devastating storm for pretty much the length of the Bahamas.
Yes, I'm really concerned about the Turks and Caicos and the entire length of the Bahamas, and rapid intensification is possible within the next couple of days. Could get to Category 4, even though the Hurricane Center is not explicitly forecasting it, but Category 3, Category 4 doesn't matter a whole lot. We're going to have a major hurricane going over a lot of land areas, but there's a lot of water there. The Bahamas are not going to serve to weaken this storm. We could have a major hurricane make landfall in the U.S. later this week.
And right now it's sort of trending towards North Carolina, and then beyond that, potentially could come up right up 95, and that would be awful for a lot of people.
If you have weekend plans in the northeast U.S., you want to start thinking about how this might impact you. It could be disruptive, maybe even dangerous.
All right, Dr. Rick Knabb, thank you very much. And guys, back to you.
Bardelli, and the last update we got on Irene was good news. It seems to be getting smaller, but that could just be temporary, right, Jeff?
We think it definitely is temporary. It has weakened a little bit. It's probably not going to last very long. And as you'll see when I show you the satellite in just about a minute or so, we've seen a big blossoming, a big blow up, a big explosion of thunderstorms near the center again. So when the Hurricane Hunter was in there before, it was kind of during a weakening phase, but now we have a strengthening phase, although the 5 o'clock advisory doesn't reflect it yet. The winds are 90 miles an hour, so it's been downgraded to a very high-end Category 1 storm. It's moving to the west-northwest at around 9 miles an hour, and right now it's located about 50 miles to the south-southwest of Grand Turk and getting closer and closer. And so obviously they're dealing with some really dicey and very stormy and dangerous conditions right now in the Turks and Caicos Islands. The pressure is 976 millibars, which is an impressive system. Here's the forecast track from the National Hurricane Center, and as you can see, it moves basically to the northwest now. And of course, we've told you this before, but the cone has been shifted a bit further to the east, and what that means for us is we're not going to see, at least in South Florida, some of the impacts that we may have seen if it came closer. But still, we could see some wind gusts to about tropical storm force and some of the squalls that we see, and that'll probably happen on Thursday when it makes its closest approach. And at that point, it's predicted to be a Category 2 hurricane. But for you folks watching in the Bahamas, we always have to prepare for a hurricane one category greater than what's predicted. So prepare for a Category 3 hurricane in the Bahamas as we head on into Thursday. Then as we move north, that's what the storm is going to be doing as we head on into Friday, perhaps as a Category 3 storm, making landfall maybe around Cape Hatteras, somewhere close to that. But remember, it could be anywhere within this cone. Now, this is an interesting situation. As it stands right now, the storm could be moving right up the eastern seaboard. A lot of storms tend to take kind of a right-hand curve out to sea, but we can't be sure exactly if this is going to move directly towards, let's say, the New York City, Long Island, Providence, Rhode Island, and Boston area, or if it's going to take that right-hand hook out to sea. So right now, this could be a really major situation for the major cities in the Northeast, including Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York City, and Boston. We could see a Category 1 hurricane, or at least that's what's predicted. Also, the ground is saturated there, so there's going to be a lot of flooding rain along with it, really regardless of where the track is. And one big problem is that systems, as they move north, move very fast along the eastern seaboard. As they pick up that momentum, the winds increase, so watching out for storm surge up there as well. Here are the latest advisories in terms of the watches and warnings. And right now we have a tropical storm warning in effect for the north coast of Haiti, and we have hurricane warnings that are in effect for the southeast Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, central Bahamas, and also in the northwestern part of the Bahamas. So taking a look at the satellite, there's South Florida, and here's the storm to the north of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And you can see just over the past hour or two that big blow up of thunderstorms, and that's why I think that weakening phase is gone, and now we're back into a strengthening phase. And there's a lot of warm water in between where the storm is right now and basically the Carolina coast, where it could be making a landfall as we head into the weekend.
The National Hurricane Center is reminding us not to let our guard down. Let's get right to the 11 o'clock advisory now. Hurricane specialist Max Mayfield is here, and we begin with Chief Meteorologist Trent Eric.
Yeah, Lori and Calvin, we've only had this advisory in our hand here for a minute or two. At 11 o'clock, the National Hurricane Center still saying a Category 1 storm, as it's now under 600 miles to the east-southeast of South Florida. Movements west-northwest at 9. Pressure is at 969 millibars. And looking at the satellite imagery tonight, this is a large hurricane near the Turks and Caicos Island. Here we are in South Florida. That's the southeastern Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos. And I want to stop the satellite imagery here on the last frame. Max and I have been watching this all night long. A eye has now emerged again on the satellite imagery with a couple of flare-ups and convection on the east and west sides of this storm. And Max, we're not the only ones watching this hurricane tonight.
That's right. There are actually a couple of airplanes out there. The NOAA P-3 aircraft is flying a research mission at 7,500 feet. The Air Force is flying one of the C-130s at 10,000 feet on the operational flight. And so there's a wealth of information that's being collected that has been used in this 11 p.m. advisory by the National Hurricane Center. The G4 jet is also out there. I always have a lot more confidence in the track forecast when that data gets into the computer models. And here's the future track here. It starts out as a Category 1 hurricane. Unfortunately, it's still going to continue right through the Bahamas here, Category 2, likely within 12 to 24 hours. Continuing towards the northwest, Thursday evening, Category 3, a major hurricane, and then turning more northward and likely will be near the Outer Banks as a Category 3, and then continuing on up into the northeast. This could have major impacts well up there in the northeast before it's all over. This is a close-up. The closest point of approach will be during the day on Thursday and into Thursday evening. But remember, this cone only tells us where the likely center of the hurricane will likely be.
Meteorologist Julie Durdez here with the details. Hi, Julie.
Hey, good morning, Christine and Diana. We are tracking Hurricane Irene, that is now a major Category 3 system. As of the 8 o'clock advisory, it's been bringing some heavy rain throughout the southern portions of the Bahamas and is continuing to track towards central Bahamas. It's a really good-looking storm. Plenty of available moisture wrapping around that center of circulation. See those feeder bands continuing to make that counterclockwise spin. Also still bringing some rain throughout portions of Hispaniola. Look at this, our visible satellite. Very interesting. It does look very pretty, but unfortunately to our friends in the Bahamas, this is not a pretty sight to see. Here is the latest on the advisory. Wind sustained at 115 miles per hour, making this our first Category 3 system of the 2011 Atlantic hurricane season. The pressure has dropped to 957 millibars. It's moving west-northwest at 9 miles per hour, and it's located 517 miles east-southeast of Miami, Florida. The system has the potential to strengthening, but it will stay as a Category 3 as it continues to push throughout the Bahamas. It will stay to the east of us, and then the concern once it leaves the Bahamas will be for the east coast of the U.S. They will be bracing for this storm as a possible Category 3, and then it looks as though it will weaken going into the end of the weekend and into early next week. Now, as you can see, there are new watches and warnings in effect. There's a tropical storm warning for the Turks and Caicos, but still a hurricane warning for all of the Bahamas. They're expecting to see some very strong storms, and we are under a tropical storm watch for the coastal waters of West Palm Beach, Broward, as well as Miami-Dade. Now you can see there's plenty of available moisture helping to fuel this system. Not only that, it is located over the very warm waters of the Atlantic. Just to the north of it, though, there is a bit of dry air. That dry air is forecasted to move into South Florida today and drop our rain chances by the afternoon. But unfortunately, our friends throughout the Bahamas will be dealing with winds anywhere between 111 to 131 miles per hour. Rainfall anywhere between 6 to 12 inches. Storm surge anywhere between 7 to 11 feet. For us, our indirect impacts will be wind gusts up to 39 miles per hour. Total rainfall less than 2 inches. We will definitely be dealing with rough surf and beach erosion in the next couple days. Another area we're watching with a 50% chance of development is Broad Low, about 100 miles south of the Cape Verde Islands. Locally,
now the focus is on the Bahamas as Irene moves north.
Let's get right to our chief meteorologist, John Morales. He has the 11 p.m. advisory issued just minutes ago. John?
Yes, and it's still a 120-mile-an-hour hurricane, Category 3 system as it barrels through the Bahamas, leaving Long Island now and heading towards Cat Island. Here are the headlines on the hurricane at this hour. It's been a major hurricane since this morning. Cat Island is next, and the system has turned northwest, will turn northbound tomorrow. Let's take a very close look here. This is a very close-in picture, infrared enhanced satellite picture of the eye of the hurricane. And now let's see, this here is Rum Cay. This is San Salvador over here. Long Island is here, and you can see how it tried to thread the needle between Rum Cay and Long Island. It's now departing that region. Here is Cat Island, and here are the Exumas. Now, 60 miles west, if the eye is here right now, 60 miles to the west of there is Georgetown in the Exumas, and they've had a wind gust there of 68 miles per hour. Now, barely in the picture way up here is New Providence Island. That's where Nassau is. Wind gusts there are 38 miles per hour at this hour. And this, by the way, is Eleuthera, and it looks like it's headed your way. Eleuthera could get a direct hit from this. That would include beautiful Harbor Island, too. Now, for the Miami and South Florida area, well, you can see how the high-level cirrus clouds are just now starting to approach from the east. Now, these do not contain any rain. The rain is all down here and is expected to move our way by tomorrow. Here is the new forecast track. Actually, first the coordinates. Notice the pressure down to 952. It was 954 before. The winds are 120 miles an hour, but it's possible that it will not intensify much further because the aircraft and satellite pictures have shown that there's concentric eye walls. In other words, one eye might replace another, and that is usually a sign of a system that might be at least temporarily weakening. Nevertheless, the National Hurricane Center, in its forecast, has it as a major Category 3, crossing through Eleuthera, approaching Great Abaco, which is this island here, and then heading on beyond the Bahamas as a Cat 4 hurricane, and by the way, passing a good 200 miles east of us, and that would be throughout the day tomorrow. And then beyond that, Outer Banks of North Carolina and possibly on into the New England area. I like to see this Cat 2. I don't mean the proximity to the U.S. I mean the fact that earlier that forecast called for a Cat 3 system approaching the Outer Banks and then on into New England. Now, a look at the weather radar shows that some of the rain from the system is just starting to be visible on the far right here as they come in from the east. By the way, also notice I've got depicted here on screen a tropical storm warning for the offshore waters of Palm Beach County, tropical storm watch down here for the offshore waters of Miami-Dade and Broward. So if you're heading offshore, I tell you what, not a good idea. As far as the wind field is concerned, yes, it's going to be coming closer to us, but it will not. The tropical storm force winds would not reach our area entirely. I will have a closer look at this particular image as well as more details of what to expect locally tomorrow coming up in about 10 or 15 minutes. Now back to you guys.
Hey everybody, I'm Kim Cunningham. It's time for the Tropical Update, 10 minutes till the hour. We have the very latest in from the National Hurricane Center on our hurricane. Irene is still a Category 3. Winds have been dropped down to about 115 miles per hour. That's still a Cat 3. Here's the projected path, which might have changed a little bit up here towards the northern parts, maybe a little bit left of where we were for the center of the hurricane, heading up towards New England by Sunday evening. So that's the very latest. The particulars keeping it a Cat 3 again, and then we're probably going to see this strengthen with time. So if you live anywhere in the East Coast, the Northeast Coast, if you live even anywhere from the Carolinas northward, this is where we could see a problem. Let's go ahead and show you now what it looks like as far as the pressure. 950 millibars, moving northwest at 12. Okay, that hasn't changed at all. But what we're seeing happening on this west side of this hurricane is it doesn't look as organized on that side, does it? It looks like, you know, we're seeing little breaks here and there. So that may be one reason why we're not seeing this thing strengthen at this time. And looking at some water vapor imagery, we're actually seeing a break, or we're seeing some southwesterly shear coming into play and some drier air possibly trying to get in to this hurricane. So I'm going to quickly show you this image, if I could, where we have looking at the break in the clouds on that west side. So there it is. You can see it very evident on this satellite image. Okay, plus it was going through an eye wall replacement cycle. A lot of times you see them weaken a little bit, but it can very easily regain strength. So you can see on this west side, okay, notice that drier air over there, and then notice too the moisture moving up in that direction. So maybe a couple things keeping this from actually intensifying. Now we will see this move of warmer waters. This is a lot warmer up here. And actually, by the way, we're starting to see northeasterly winds in Miami with gusts over 20 miles per hour. Just expecting big surf, maybe some rain bands trying to come in there, but that's really about it. All right, up around Cape Hatteras though, the projected path or the forecast models takes it right over the Hatteras area, or they're kind of conspiring in that region. That's what we look at. We look at these models because really this is all we have over the next couple of days to look at. And they're all saying they're going to be heading north. But look at this. This is what's very different at this time with the latest forecast models. Notice all these now off to the left. Before, they were all over in this direction. So now this possibly, if you go with these models, we may be talking about a more inland track. Now, what does that mean for us? That means very strong onshore winds and surge here for maybe the Cape and the Bay as well. But also looking at maybe some significant flooding even into eastern New York. Again, if we go with these models. So a west track would mean it going maybe up towards the Providence area, taking the brunt of this storm. That's where Cantori is going to be, I think. So this is something we got to keep an eye on. So it all depends on this trough. So maybe what's picking up on the first trough comes up, it picks it up towards the north, but this second trough may actually be a little bit deeper, and that may actually bring it in a little bit farther inland, like the European model was indicating. So keep you up to date on this.
It's 50 past the hour and time for your tropical update. We've brought in this morning our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb.
And Dr. Knabb, I want to focus on the fact that this is a huge system, so, you know, over 400 miles across. So it's not just the coast, and I feel like that's where a lot of people make the mistake. Inland flooding, one of the #1 killers when we're talking about hurricanes. So who all in what range really need to be aware and prepared?
Yeah, you know, and the best way I can depict that is with our threat level graphic that I'll show in a minute. But Stephanie, you're absolutely right. The size of this hurricane is a big part of the story, not just because that means In addition to the coast, you have inland impacts, but it also means a bigger hurricane's slower to weaken. A bigger hurricane that's only going to be moving 15, 20 miles an hour up the coast is going to mean a longer duration of tropical storm and hurricane force winds. The longer the winds blow, the more damage they can do. So the size is a big problem. Oh, and by the way, bigger hurricanes create more storm surge. Remember Ike, for example. So let's look at how large this hurricane is on satellite imagery. And by the way, it's not the only tropical cyclone out there. We actually have a new tropical depression, 10 out in the eastern Atlantic, but that's going to be moving out in the open Atlantic. Don't worry about that one. We have plenty on our minds right now with Hurricane Irene, which is a large Category 3, max winds of 115 miles an hour. Pressure is 950, a pretty low pressure. And the aircraft have been finding the maximum winds not just a few miles from the center, but tens of miles from the center. So it's a big hurricane, and it's still hammering the Bahamas at this hour. But you see how large this system is in addition to being a strong Category 3 major hurricane. We can see a little bit of the circulation at the middle levels on the radar from Florida, outer bands, the fringes starting to get on the southeast coast of Florida, and the northwestern Bahamas, Freeport and Nassau getting some really, really strong winds and rains this morning. Headed in the general direction of the Carolinas over the next couple of days. That's why hurricane watches are already up in the Carolinas, especially North Carolina, and this could re-strengthen this
track for us, Jackie. Getting closer, Kira, and we're going to continue to see it move near to Florida throughout the day today. While the storm's expected to stay about 200 miles away from the Florida coast, just its sheer size is already bringing in showers and thunder showers and strong gusty winds. In fact, we've got a picture right here to show you out of Miami. That camera's been shaking around a little bit, and you've been getting those occasional strong gusts as well as those rainy conditions. Expect a couple inches overall throughout the day for today. Now, let's talk a little bit. Oops, excuse me. Let's talk a little bit now about how intense this storm is. Category 3 right now, 115 mile per hour maximum sustained winds. It's going to fluctuate a little bit throughout the day today. It's been going through what we call an eye wall replacement cycle, which initially will weaken a storm a little bit, but then ultimately will ramp it back up. So that's why we're expecting this to become a 4 again, maybe later today, maybe tomorrow, as it continues to bash all the way through the Bahamas. It will spend tomorrow moving along the Florida coast and on up towards the Carolinas. Those watches, which are in effect right now, means you've got 48 hours to prepare. Make those final preparations really before you'll feel these conditions. So Saturday morning, you'll start to feel it in the Carolinas and possible landfall late on Saturday, and then scraping on up to the coast into the northeast. And there will be some weakening here in the northeast because of wind shear as well as cooler water temperatures, but still perhaps a Category 1 or 2 if we get that landfall. And even if we don't get that secondary landfall, we think the impacts will be great because of heavy rain, a lot of flooding, and damaging wind.
Meteorologist Lisette Gonzalez is standing by with the latest on Hurricane Irene. Lisette.
All right, good afternoon, and good afternoon to all of you at home. Right now, here is the latest 11 a.m. advisory. Hurricane Irene is still a major, dangerous and powerful Category 3 hurricane with max sustained winds of 115 miles an hour and 75 miles northeast of Nassau. Expected to continue tracking towards the northwest with the possibility of strengthening into a Category 4 hurricane as it continues to just bear down on the Bahamas to our east, and we're feeling the local impacts as well. As we head into Friday and into Saturday morning, the potential that Irene could make landfall somewhere along the Carolina coast or the Outer Banks, possibly as a Category 3 hurricane, and all eyes up and down the eastern seaboard on Irene, especially as we head into the weekend, because there is a potential Sunday into Monday that we could see a catastrophic disaster, as right now the forecast track takes Irene towards the northeast, New England area, the mid-Atlantic as a Category 2 hurricane, and thereafter continuing to track towards the north and east. Right now, we're seeing that the hurricane warning continues for central and northwestern Bahamas, and now we have a tropical storm watch that's in place for folks along the South Carolina coast through Surf City, North Carolina, and from that point all the way up through North Carolina and the Virginia border, hurricane watch has been issued and preparations have already begun. The satellite imagery is showing us this monster of a hurricane that is just slamming our friends over in the Bahamas, and we'll take a closer look and show you that we are seeing that the hurricane is moving across Eleuthera and also still across Nassau. In fact, we have a live shot that we want to show you right now so that you can see just how strong and powerful the winds are, and that's where our very own Ted Scouten is reporting live. And we'll get back to the satellite and show you that Hurricane Irene continues to move towards the northwest, and right now now hitting Abacos and now spreading into Grand Bahama as well. So here's the radar showing us that we have a nasty rain band that actually is beginning to move into portions of Palm Beach County and Boca Raton, and even now moving into the coast of Deerfield Beach. And I want you to be very cautious because we're seeing very deep purples and reds indicating the potential for a severe storm with some of these cells that are now beginning to move into the west. We even have some dangerous lightning firing up just offshore. And of course, we'll continue to monitor the situation and keep you updated. And for the meantime, we're going to see the rain bands continuing to move in throughout the day today with torrential downpours and even the potential for dangerous lightning. Here are some of our highest wind gusts, up to 29, 30 miles an hour in some locations. In Fort Lauderdale, that was the case, 29 in Homestead. WeatherBug showing us.
We have breaking news now, live pictures out of Miami. Take a look at the rain bands coming around from Hurricane Irene. Irene is well to the east of the east coast of Florida as it moves across the northern Bahamas right now. But again, this is a very wide storm with tropical storm force winds extending out almost 300 miles from the center of circulation. So you can see why we're getting those rain bands over the southeastern coastal areas of Florida from West Palm Beach all the way down to Miami. And again, this is a huge storm with those tropical storm force winds, and actually the hurricane force winds extend out a good 70 miles from the center. The center, by the way, is right about here in Abaco Island in the northern Bahamas. In fact, just to the west of that is Grand Bahama. This is Freeport. Again, a good 150 miles away now from the east coast of Florida. But because this system is so huge, we're talking about those tropical storm force winds being felt all the way to the southeast coast of the Sunshine State. Now, the good news is that we're not expecting Irene to make a direct hit on Florida, so that is great. Again, extending out from the center almost 300 miles, those tropical storm force winds. So another look at the overall radar picture does show those bands coming around. Again, the center right about here. So we've had 30 and 40 mile an hour winds associated with some of these rain bands. But as mentioned, Irene is moving north-northwest. So
showing us the damage from Abaco Island and Irene. Here's an absolutely stunning look at Irene from the International Space Station. It almost appears as if the storm is covering the entire planet.
We continue our team coverage now with hurricane specialist Max Mayfield and meteorologist Trent Eric with more on the 5 o'clock advisory.
Yeah, looking here at the satellite imagery, Lori and Calvin, you can see how large Irene is just to our east. And boy, we need to count our blessings here across South Florida. Just a couple of 100 miles away. This is the last time I want to see a major hurricane this close to South Florida this year. I can tell you that much. And looking at the bands moving in today, we have seen on and off rain, some breezy conditions, but nothing we can't handle here in Dade, Broward, and the Florida Keys. 5 o'clock advisory is in. The storm about 198 miles to the east-northeast of us right now. Winds at 115. National Hurricane Center still keeping it a Category 3, and the movement right now is west or north-northwest rather at 14. So that slow turn to the north happened late last night and early this morning. Pressure still down at 950 millibars. I want to show you what it looks like on the radar. The long-range composite shooting all the way across the Bahamas. This is the eye of Hurricane Irene, now moving off of Abaco Island. So the south side of the eye is currently moving over Abaco and will continue to pull away. So the worst appears to be over here for the Bahamas, and as this eye continues to pull away, the winds will start to weaken slowly, but right now still getting hit pretty hard there in Abaco. Grand Bahama, a pretty good rain band moving from north to south, and right here in South Florida we have heavy thunderstorms in Delray Beach. These will move along the coastal regions of Broward County over the next half hour to 45 minutes. But Max, the storm doesn't stop here. It's going to continue to move. Tell us where this storm's headed here the next couple of days.
Okay, yeah, the biggest impacts are yet to come. Here we are starting out right now with Category 3 hurricane just north of the northwestern Bahamas. It's going to be turning more northward, a little bit east to due north, and by Saturday impacting North Carolina. And then on Sunday, it'll move over the Delmarva and the New Jersey coastal areas and continue right on up into New England, including the Long Island, New York City area and the Cape Cod area. So you can imagine all the people that are going to be impacted by this.
Yeah, Max, you mentioned some rather large metropolitan areas, and with a hurricane that's this big, how big of evacuations are we talking about up the East Coast, and what does the models look like tonight with that storm?
Well, let's take a look at this.
Hey guys, it's 10 minutes till the hour. It's time for that tropical update. I know a lot of you concerned and worried about this hurricane, and you should be, but we want you to be prepared. That's going to help ease a lot of your concerns and your anxiety. So get prepared, listen to your local authorities, and do what they ask you to do. It's very important you do that. Here's the very latest. The pressure is 942 millibars. The wind's 115 miles per hour. We'll get the next advisory. The next tropical update, it's moving north at 14. That has been one of the changes, the fact that it's now moving north versus northwest, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But the center is almost 500 miles south-southwest of Cape Hatteras. Notice the cirrus clouds making their way all the way into the Carolinas as we speak. As a matter of fact, already starting to see some of the rain bands getting very close. We'll show you that momentarily too. Wanted to show you that the eye was getting smaller and smaller. Okay, that's also indicating possibly a strengthening hurricane. Now the winds have not gone up, the pressure has dropped. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to do that, but notice that central dense overcast, that area right in there, those reds and purples, looking pretty concentric at this time. We had a little trouble earlier. It does look a little bit healthier as we speak. On that west side though, maybe feeling the effects of that trough up towards the north, but still holding its own, moving over warm waters and away from land. So that could be one reason why we're seeing this thing strengthening. Look at the
And good morning, everybody. Hurricane Irene. After a destructive rampage through the Bahamas, this massive storm now threatening the United States. Here in North Carolina, a hurricane warning in effect. President Obama declaring a state of emergency. Once past the Outer Banks, it's forecast to rake the coastline all the way north into New England, potentially affecting more than 65 million people. Widespread power outages, fallen trees, storm surge, flooding could result in billions of dollars in damage. We have complete live coverage, team coverage of this historic storm right here, right now on Wake Up with Al. Good morning, everybody. It is Friday, August 26th. You are looking at an angrier surf this morning than just 24 hours ago here in Duck, North Carolina. We're live on the Outer Banks of North Carolina awaiting Hurricane Irene. I'm Al Roker along with Stephanie Abrams, and we just got the latest in from the National Hurricane Center. Down a little bit.
Yes, down to a Category 2, winds at 110 miles an hour. Moving north, however. There's no westerly or easterly component. North at 14 miles an hour.
All right, well, here we go. Let's get started. We got complete live coverage of this major event.
Absolutely. The waves and rain from Irene have already started to be felt in the U.S. on some of the beaches there into South Florida. We'll have the latest outlook when the worst of Irene will hit the coast from our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb. And we'll also show you who needs to evacuate and where those hurricane watches and warnings have been posted.
And this just in also gives you an idea of the power of this storm, even if you are not right by it. People standing on a pier in Florida injured yesterday by a massive wave that caught them off guard. This was sent into us from WPTV, our NBC affiliate in Palm Beach, by one of the folks at the scene. The wave swept people off of a jetty at Boynton Beach, sending them into the metal railing and onto a concrete pier. 8 people taken to the hospital with injuries. One woman had to be airlifted to a medical center. So beaches all along the East Coast are going to start seeing these kind of waves as Hurricane Irene gets closer.
And let's show you the very latest again. We want to show you the satellite picture and its exact positioning right now and where it is headed to. Again, a Category 2 just now. Our pressure is at 942. So the pressure's dropping. The winds just have yet to catch up. But that does kind of indicate that we could see some intensification and those winds strengthen.
And moving north at 14 miles per hour. We want to get some expert analysis on this massive storm. It spreads out 650 miles. That's a distance between Miami and Atlanta. And speaking of Atlanta, let's go to Dr. Rick Knabb right now for the latest. So, Dr. Knabb, what does this mean as you look at this?
I do not want anyone to be relieved at the change from Category 3 to Category 2. One reason is the Hurricane Center anticipates, for good reason, that it could re-strengthen back to Category 3 before getting to North Carolina. And The pressure is very low, as you mentioned, and it's still a very large hurricane. Ike was a Category 2 at landfall. Category 2 hurricanes do not mean not a bad situation. So let's take a look at the numbers again. Winds at 110. That pressure is really, really low, 942 millibars, and it is moving toward the north. Here's the latest forecast path. Again, re-strengthening is what the Hurricane Center forecasts before getting to North Carolina. So we still could have the direct landfall of a major Category 3 hurricane in North Carolina. Then the gradual weakening will ensue. But again, as we mentioned the last couple of days, the weakening of a large hurricane likely to be rather slow. And that means hurricane conditions could be impacting a big part of the mid-Atlantic and northeast coast. And in fact, we'll detail as we go through the next several minutes how the watches and warnings, hurricane watches and warnings, have been extended northward. Here it is, moving northward toward the North Carolina area, so that you can really start to get the sense this is coming our way now. The eye wall convection, the thunderstorms have waned a little bit, but again, it's headed toward very warm waters. It's going to go over the Gulf Stream before it reaches North Carolina. So guys, let's not be letting our guard down just because of the temporary weakening. Back to you.
All right, Dr. Knapp, thanks so much. We'll be checking in with you throughout the program.
Half past the hour. Good morning. Thanks for staying with us on your weather today for continuing coverage of Hurricane Irene. Forecast to potentially be one of the most impactful East Coast hurricanes in decades, Stephanie.
That's right. I'm meteorologist Stephanie Abrams. Along the coast of the Carolinas here in the Outer Banks in Duck, North Carolina, we want to give you the very latest here on Hurricane Irene, currently a Category 2 hurricane with winds at 110 miles per hour. Here is a look at the pressure down to actually up a little bit as of the 8 a.m. advisory at 945 millibars, moving north at 14 miles an hour. Now, we see this thing via satellite and also via on the ground, but there's another way that we get information. That's from the hurricane hunters, and right now, NBC's Peter Alexander has been flying in and out of Hurricane Irene and brings us this update.
Teal 74 request. This is an inside look at the ferocious storm tens of millions of Americans now fear. Irene, a massive hurricane, churning its way up the East Coast.
Should be pretty close.
At 10,000 feet, the veteran crew of the U.S. Air Force Reserve's 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron is heading right into the eye of the storm.
It looks like it's going to be pretty close to Abaco Island.
John Talbot, the squadron's chief meteorologist, has flown into more than 150 eye walls over 26 years.
The most critical element in that plan is the geographic position of the center of the storm. If you don't know where it's starting, you don't know where it's going to finish.
During our 11-hour flight, researchers released nearly a dozen highly sensitive probes called dropsondes with GPS built in. They fall toward the ocean with a tiny parachute, relaying back vital information, including humidity, pressure, wind speed, and temperature.
Thinking about 6 right.
Up front, the flight's commander, Shane Devlin, guides us through blinding clouds.
Everything you learn as a pilot, as an aviator out there, is to leave bad weather. And we do just the opposite.
Here in the cockpit, we're about to show you something that very few people ever see up close, the hurricane's eye wall. We are now 3 minutes away, 15 miles from there. The wind speeds outside this aircraft are more than 100 miles per hour.
Minutes later, we finally enter the eye and get our first glimpse of blue. Below, those white-capped waves are more than 30 feet high. The storm itself, more than 200 miles long. By sunset, we head home. Another set of hurricane hunters already en route to meet Irene and help detail the next forecast.
That was NBC's Peter Alexander. We now want to bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb, and talk about the connection between the hurricane hunters and the actual hurricane. Dr. Knabb, tell the viewers what kind of data they get out of flying through this thing and how exactly that helps us forecast.
It really is a fire hose of data, and a forecaster at the Hurricane Center is getting all of that in almost exactly real time as soon as the transmission will allow it. And they're getting data at flight level, they're dropping dropsondes out of the belly of the aircraft, and they're using instruments to measure the wind speeds at the surface. So a whole host of data coming out of the aircraft. And right now, what you see from the aircraft is the pressure is 945 millibars. That was the 8 a.m. advisory pressure that the Hurricane Center used based on the aircraft data, and the aircraft showed that the winds winds were at 110 miles an hour. First few visible images of the day shows the eye is down here, well off the northeast Florida coast. Very tall thunderstorms. When you have this angle of the sun at the beginning of the day, you can see the overshooting tops really well. The outer bands just offshore of the Carolinas, but as the models show, the hurricane is on the doorstep of making landfall, probably in the Carolinas. All the models show that happening somewhere in eastern North Carolina, then going up through New England and all the way into Canada at some point. They just disagree a little bit on the forward speed, but it's going to be a bad weekend all the way up the coast. We'll detail the hazards in a little while, Mike.
Dr. Knapp, thank you. Now
let's get another update on Irene.
7's Julie Durda is live in the Weather Center to give us that update. Julie?
That's right. Good afternoon, ladies in South Florida. I want to show you this amazing satellite. This is our visible satellite picking up the cloud cover all associated with Hurricane Irene. You can see the system is very large, and you can see that center of circulation, that eye, trying to develop once again. It's been going through eye wall replacement for quite some time, but it looks as though that center is about south-southwest of Cape Hatteras. A very impressive storm. All the ingredients are there to keep this system strong as it moves towards the east coast of the U.S., which is not good news for our friends there. Outer bands already affecting portions of the Carolinas, the coastal areas of the Carolinas. You can see Myrtle Beach seeing some showers, and also seeing some showers up towards North Carolina, even Virginia with the outer bands of this system. The color satellite is indicating how much moisture is with this system, and you can see the darker reds indicate the colder cloud tops and the more thunderstorm activity that's around that center that's trying to show us an eye this afternoon. Regardless, though, the National Hurricane Center stating at 11 o'clock the winds have gone down to 105 miles per hour. That is still a Category 2 system. This is still a strong system moving to the north at 14 miles per hour with a pressure of 946 millibars. It's about 330 miles south-southwest of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Take a look at the forecast cone as it does continue to push towards the north. The change in the forecast cone as of the 11 o'clock advisory is that they're stating this system should stay as a Category 2 hurricane, which is even better news for our friends in the mid-Atlantic states as well as the East Coast. It should make landfall somewhere near the Outer Banks of North Carolina by tomorrow as a Category 2, and then it will make a beeline up the mid-Atlantic states and bring them some very nasty weather going through the weekend and into early next week. I want to show you the radar so you can actually see the rain that's falling over Myrtle Beach and Cape Hatteras over the Carolinas. Now we are expecting the system to continue to keep those outer bands, bringing some showers to possibly even portions of Georgia and northern Florida until the system pushes more towards the north.
Large hurricane, there's just nothing good about the hurricane being as large as it is. We'd rather things be smaller if you're going to keep the intensity the same.
So as we take a look at some of the graphics here, first of all, the sustained winds, we're starting to get those tropical storm force winds there.
Yeah, right in here, this is measured at near the surface, and 43 miles an hour here, that's above tropical storm threshold. Is 38 is right there on the threshold. So these bands that are coming in are not only going to bring sustained tropical storm force winds at the low end, but the gusts will be higher than that, and that's where the heavy rains are starting too.
And you don't have an incredibly intense core right now, but you've got this huge wind field, and maybe 18 hours of weather before the core even comes ashore.
I don't know about you, Carl, but the more I look at this radar signature, the more I'm starting to get the sense that what a huge rainmaker this is going to be, because once this band comes on shore in North Carolina, it is not going to stop raining for hours and hours. And remember, the center's way down here. It's not going to come ashore until into tomorrow, and then you got the whole backside of the hurricane to deal with.
Right. And take a look at this too. This is the wave heights there. In the white, we're talking about 30-foot wave heights already offshore. To a former colleague of yours, the director of the National Hurricane Center, Bill Reed. Bill, good to talk to you again. And we have been talking about the fact that we do not want people to focus on what's going on with the category because this is such a large and such a powerful storm.
Oh, absolutely. If you could rewind the clock and not have categories at all, it would probably be helpful. You'd stick with the impacts. Just like you were just talking, I was listening as you talk. That's exactly how we should be presenting this, and that seems to be working as we go up the coast. The briefings I'm in, the feedback I'm getting, the people that have to make the key decisions understand what the threat is that's coming at them.
Bill, when you're talking to the emergency managers, as I know you do on a continuous basis in a situation like this, are they all looking at the same storm surge information, and are they all prepared to issue evacuation orders for that hazard when that becomes necessary?
It's already working. As far as I know now, there's evacuations in the Delmarva all the way through North Carolina, and from what I've been hearing is they've been so far smooth and and successful. It's a little hard when and you've been here at this end and probably even at yours to know exactly how it's transpiring on the ground, except unless you're actually in that community. But at least from what I'm hearing, the decision-making process is going as it's expected to go given the threat.
Bill, what is your sense about the potential for power outages along the East Coast? I know there's going to be a huge wind field with this storm coming up through major metro areas, a lot of suburban areas, trees that are full of leaves and saturated ground on top of that.
That's correct. This whole area from New England down through the mid-Atlantic to the nation's capital has had excessive rain for them. 5 to 10 inches, which equates to 200 or greater % of normal. Rivers are running high, the water levels are high. The wind, even tropical storm force wind over many hours on big trees with a lot of foliage tends to have a tree fall. Remember what happened during Isabel.
All right, Director of the Hurricane Center, Bill Reed, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. And we're going to have much more coming up here in just a moment on the specifics of the storm. Let's get over and find out what's happening on Twitter right now. Here's Mark with that.
Huge deal. I want to bring in our hurricane specialist, Mr. Brian Norcross. Again, we've been talking about just this area, but Brian, again, a multi-hazard hurricane. And I think, you know, we really haven't brought home enough the fact that New England is going to have a horrible Sunday night. Trees are going to be toppling, power lines are going to be toppling, simply from this thing's wind field being so large and so long in duration.
Yeah, and not just that kind of water, Jim. We have both kinds of water hazards here. One is the rain over top of the saturated land, trees coming down, the power lines, and all of that. The other is on the Rhode Island and Connecticut coast, depending on the exact track, the water coming in Long Island Sound and all those bays and inlets and all of that, that is at risk as well. We just can't pinpoint exactly how much water is going to be there. And it has begun, as we've been talking about. Tonight is the night. Take a look at the radar here. Now it's close enough to see from land-based radar, obviously the center of circulation there. But over here in the Charleston area, damage there on James Island in Charleston, and also buoys just offshore of Charleston and just offshore of Wilmington in North Carolina, up over 60 miles an hour. So it looks like this band here, right in there, is where the really strong first round of strong winds are, just about to impact the North Carolina coast. All right, why do we have confidence?
Chad, we can see there from Brian Todd the power of this hurricane, and it is clearly heading, as you've been predicting now for a while, right down the East Coast. Tell me exactly what we are looking at as we speak now.
We're looking at a hurricane that's actually getting a little bit stronger tonight. It's getting its act together here. There's the eye of the storm. Our Brian Todd right here, Wrightsville Beach, Wilmington. I just saw a gust there of 50 miles per hour. So he is almost as close as you can get. This is the closest pass that he will get. The storm will eventually move on up toward the Cape Hatteras region, which is northeast of him. But he is really now, look at all these waves, wave after wave of significant rainfall moving in to Brian's location. And that's why it was so difficult. He is right there at that point. So difficult to get that communication. And Wilmington now has picked up over 5 inches of rainfall, and literally it hasn't even started yet. We still have 12 or 15 more hours, Pierce, of more heavy rainfall. There could be a foot of rain right where Brian Todd is. You have the water coming in from the ocean and another foot of rain trying to wash down the rivers. Significant flash flooding is going to occur right there.
We can now. Go ahead.
Okay. You can't find this track in the record book, Jim, because a record book, because the track goes back to 1851. But this track was actually 1821, and this was a devastating storm up the East Coast. I got to bring you an update just in, Jim. All New York City airports closing tomorrow at noon. They're closing them because the mass transit is being closed, so they can't get people to and from the airports. So all New York City airports closing at noon tomorrow. All right, there's your hurricane now. Here are these very strong rain bands already coming ashore. There are several of them, and it's going to take all night and into tomorrow.
Into Irene. So tonight we could still see maybe a shower or two across Miami-Dade and down throughout the Keys. By tomorrow, the heat will continue to come up from the Caribbean, and it's going to be stifling all across South Florida. Here's the latest on Irene. We're still looking at a Category 2 storm, 100-mile-per-hour winds moving north-northeast at 14, just over 200 miles south-southwest of Cape Hatteras, which is right about here. Those barrier islands getting hit hard right now with tropical storm force winds, a lot of heavy rain. The waves are pounding on shore. They'll have a lot of erosion and coastal flooding. Now, this is probably the worst case scenario, not so much in intensity, but because it will impact a lot of land areas right along the coast. Category 1 now expected all the way in through Sunday. Hopefully by the time it approaches New York, it'll be downgraded to a tropical storm, the same through Massachusetts, and then the system will rapidly die out in the cold waters of the northern Atlantic. Yesterday, we had tropical depression number 10. It completely fell apart this afternoon. That is all that's left of it. We are looking at one more tropical wave coming off the west coast of Africa. But right now, nothing to worry about outside of Irene. Everything is looking very good. Here's a marine forecast, small craft advisory.
Experts. Hurricane specialist Max Mayfield is right here.
And we begin with our chief meteorologist, Trent Air.
Yeah, Calvin and Lori, we're looking at Hurricane Irene and the 11 o'clock advisory. The storm is pushing tropical storm force winds on shore from Wilmington to Cape Hatteras. Rain has been falling for hours here as they're on the northern fringe of this hurricane. Here are the 11 o'clock numbers. 201 miles now to the south-southwest of Cape Hatteras in the Outer Banks here. Winds of 100. Still a Category 2 storm. Movement is north-northeast at 13. That's just 1 mile per hour slower than what it was at the intermediate advisory at 8 o'clock. Pressure at 951 millibars. But again, looking at the storm itself, the center of circulation, the eye of the hurricane, is being picked up by the radar sites in the Carolinas, and it is strong enough to penetrate into that. But the lack of rainfall here on the eastern side is just simply the fact that the radars can't see it. There is rain that wraps around this whole circulation. They have had winds so far here in the Carolinas of 28 miles per hour Wilmington, 24 Cape Hatteras, 22 in Charleston, and gusting at times in the lower 50s here in Wilmington. Now remember, this is the same storm that went through the Bahamas as a Category 3. This was the damage as it looked there in Great Abaco Island in the Bahamas, Marsh Harbor. Power lines down, several sailboats were capsized and sunk, and just bottom line, a lot of cleanup here as trees were falling, branches, palm fronds, some damage here to buildings. A Texaco gas station there where the awning was lifted off during the storm. So far, no reports of any deaths coming from the Bahamas. We're still waiting to hear from some of the islands as power is yet to be restored and probably will be out for some time. Now, back to the map here. What we're looking at here with this hurricane is, Max, a core that's changing here over the past several hours.
Well, that's right. We don't see the eye anymore. Usually you lose that eye definition. That's a sign of weakening. We've had 2 Hurricane Hunter planes out there, one from NOAA, one from the Air Force. They're flying at different altitudes there, and they really, the pressure hasn't changed, the winds haven't changed very much, so this is still a Category 2 hurricane. If we look at the wind field, now this forecast has been so consistent for a few days here. The red represents the hurricane force winds, the yellow the tropical storm force winds, and by tomorrow morning the center should be just off the Outer Banks of North Carolina. But look at these storm force winds all the way up here on the southern portion of the Delmarva Peninsula. Then by tomorrow evening, the center is going to be emerging off the coast of near North Carolina-Virginia border, and then the storm force winds all the way up here into New Jersey at that time. And then by Sunday morning, the center is going to be just off the coast of northern New Jersey. Storm force winds well up into New England. And if we zoom in here, this is Sunday morning. Hurricane force winds likely in the Long Island area. Now, I should say this. This is the Hurricane Center's best forecast here. There's probably about a 50% chance that will not be a hurricane there. There's a good chance it could be down to a strong tropical storm, but it really doesn't matter exactly how strong, because those strong winds are going to be pushing a lot of water up onto the coastline there. That's going to be a real concern.
Now back to Anderson.
Joining us now is Ed Rappaport, Deputy Director of the National Hurricane Center. He joins us, of course, tonight from Miami. So how does this hurricane compare to others that we've seen?
What's different about this hurricane is that the forecast track, which is pretty much locked in now, at least through North Carolina, through the eastern part of the state, is going to be a little bit farther to the west than what we've seen for other hurricanes in the Northeast. And for some folks, that means this will be the most significant event, perhaps in 20 years, from a tropical system. So normally when we have a hurricane out here approaching North Carolina, we see the track move on out to sea, missing New England, missing the coast to the south. But in this case, the forecast track comes up through North Carolina, the eastern part of the state, but doesn't turn right away. Instead, it moves very close to the shoreline, perhaps then across Long Island and southern New England. That means all the weather that is usually, and in this case, worse to the east, will be much closer to the metropolitan areas this time around. And in fact, will definitely hit the southern New England area. And since there are strong winds, high surge right near the center of the storm, we'll see some of that along the east coast as well.
So for a city like New York, I mean, what strength do you think the storm will be when it comes into this region? Is there any way to say definitively?
At this point, what we have is a Category 2 hurricane that's very slowly weakening. We think it'll still be Category 2, perhaps Category 1 as it crosses North Carolina. And then that continued slow weakening will persist through the landfall in New England. By the time it gets up to the New York area and to southern New England, we're probably looking at a lower end Category 1 hurricane, perhaps upper end of the tropical storm conditions. What's important about this particular storm is not so much the peak intensity, but the duration. It's a very large hurricane. And in North Carolina, they're going to experience hurricane force winds for as much as 10 hours. And the whole East Coast near the center of the storm will experience tropical storm conditions for as much as 24 hours. So it's a long period to have a battering of wind as well as higher levels of storm surge. And because it's so long, we're going to go through a full tidal cycle in the Northeast as well. There are going to be relatively high tides coming this weekend. So the high tides this weekend plus the storm surge has us concerned for the shoreline.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. A lot of damage, no doubt, probably in Long Island. I mean, I didn't realize that it was going to be lingering around for those tropical storm winds for 24 hours. That's with the tidal surge. That could be really very unpleasant for an awful lot of people. Ed Rappaport, I appreciate it. Let us know what you think.
Let's hope we can report the same thing after what this makes landfall tonight.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the case, Elliot. Here's why. I see a lot of parallels between this storm and Hurricane Ike and Hurricane Wilma in South Florida. Very large storms, but garden variety in the sense that we're not talking about a 4 or 5, but a Category 1 or 2 hurricane striking large metropolitan areas. Ike caused the largest power outage in United States history, and Wilma produced hurricane force winds from the Palm Beaches all the way to the Florida Keys. This is going to spread hurricane force winds along the entire East Coast, and the wind is going to blow for a long time. So I think we're going to see tremendous power outages. And also look at the heavy rains on the coastal plains of North Carolina this evening. Yeah, flooding, especially on the western side of the storm. That's where the heaviest rain is going to be. In the east side, we're going to worry about the storm surge. 100-mile-per-hour winds, less than 200 miles away from Cape Hatteras. Again, the forecast cone is on track to take this right along the east coast over the next 48 hours. By tomorrow night, it's right off the Delmarva as potentially a Category 1, maybe Category 2 hurricane, and then driving it right into the tri-state area, perhaps the New York City area where the center is going to go, western Long Island. However you look at it, just to the east, where the worst surge is going to be, to the west, severe rain and flooding over in this direction, and the wind blowing everywhere with the very heavy forested areas in the northeast. That's going to cause a lot of tree and power down, a lot of power lines to come down.
That center heads that way. In fact, Kelly is tracking where Irene is right now on the radar.
And the waves are getting taller and taller, Paul. We're taking a look at the radar picture. You can see the eye of the storm right there, and clearly the heavy rain pounding eastern North Carolina right now, where wave heights are now getting up over 25 feet. And as you can see, we've got the red showing up now across northeastern North Carolina. That's where the worst of it is right now, the heaviest rainfall. And we've seen some flashes of lightning with this as well, and even reports of tornado touchdowns. Some of that heavy rain now working its way up through Virginia Beach and now about to move into Norfolk, Virginia at the forecast. But with that said, let's show you what it looks like in a minute. All right, so looking at these 40s, 50s, we've seen 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts. We're not far from hurricane force winds. They extend out 90 miles from the center, probably about 9 hours away from the center itself, coming ashore or at least towards the Outer Banks. All right, so tornado watch, they talked about this already till 11 o'clock. With any of these rain bands coming in, especially where you see the reds, they could spin up very quickly.
4 minutes past the hour on this Saturday morning, and the storm riders are out chasing Hurricane Irene in Morehead City, North Carolina, and we want to bring them in for the latest. Of course, Simon Brewer and Justin Drake join us now live on the phone. And guys, update us on the conditions currently around Morehead City and Atlantic Beach.
Well, right now we're over on Atlantic Beach, and the storm surge has come up high enough now. There are waves that are hitting the first floor of the hotel where we're located. They're slamming up against the wall facing the beach, and there are some small structures nearby that have sustained some damage.
How many folks are at the hotel, and do you know if anyone's going to be evacuated?
Evacuated? Right now, the only people who've been staying around our hotel is actually us and another news crew that's downstairs. But besides that, we haven't seen any other locals that are actually staying at the hotel. I think most of the people that were actually here have either evacuated or the locals are just batting down the hatches and actually riding out the hurricane in their own houses.
All right. What about power outages? Do you have power where you're currently located?
We lost power a little bit ago. Usually when the winds start to get up to around 50 miles an hour, it's usually when the power goes out, and it's pretty much right around there when our power went out.
Are you seeing any other signs of flooding in the distance or down the street? I don't know how far you can see where you're located, but...
Well, right now we're actually facing the ocean, so the only type of flooding we can see is actually from the storm surge that's coming in. Outside, facing actually towards the street, it's pitch black, and we haven't ventured out there too much quite yet. Actually, after we get a view of the storm surge, we're going to head downstairs and see how strong the winds are, and then we can see if there's any flooding that's actually more further in on the barrier island.
All right, of course, storm riders Simon Brewer and Justin Drake there reporting on conditions going downhill right now around Atlantic Beach in North Carolina.
Take a look at this jaw-dropping video out of Boynton Beach where a big wave generated by Hurricane Irene knocked out a group of people standing on a jetty. Now, the video shows one gigantic wave taking out the group of people that were standing on that jetty, and then a second wave hits them as well. 8 people were hurt. 1 person had to be taken to the hospital. It just shows you the power of Irene even down here, and we are a long ways off from it. Michael Smith now joining us to talk about Irene.
Yeah, you can't underestimate the storm, Michael, especially even though it's being downgraded. People have to understand it's a big storm.
Still a Cat 1.
That's right. It is a very big storm as far as its area goes. The 5 o'clock advisory, winds now sustained at 90 miles an hour, so that's down just a little bit, gusting to 115 miles an hour, moving northeast at 14 miles an hour. 484 miles southwest of New York City, the center of the storm, that is. All right, here's a look at the radar and cloud cover over the last 12 hours, and you can see the counterclockwise spin. Here's the eye right there, approaching parts of the Outer Banks within the next hour and a half. So very rough weather here, gusty winds sustained right now. From the east-southeast, Cape Hatteras at 49 miles an hour, a 40-mile-an-hour sustained wind in Wilmington, North Carolina. From the north-northeast and a easterly, make that northwesterly wind right now in Charleston, South Carolina at 18 miles an hour.
With Hurricane Irene, there's also a tornado watch.
Yeah, that is going to be in effect here throughout the morning hours. And for many people who live in, hurricane country and they deal with this a lot, they know it can come with definitely a tornado threat. We'll take a look at my radar here, and what you're going to find is it encompasses most of the North Carolina coastline all the way right up into portions of Virginia, again, under a tornado watch till 11 o'clock this morning. It's really on this right side. We tend to get a lot of rotation happening, and that's when we, tend to see tornadoes that can develop. They're usually on the weaker side, F0 to F1, but still, as we often learn, it only takes one tornado to bring quite a bit of damage. All right, let's get a look right now. Some of the worst and strongest, impacts of the storm being felt right now with a Category 1 still at this point. Right where NBC's Kerry Sanders is at Atlantic Beach, we saw the pier going down earlier, and look at this, winds still gusting 60 to 74 plus miles.
This morning, let me turn it over to Jackie Jarris, our meteorologist, keeping an eye on this storm. And it's amazing. Both of those guys we just saw there, Jackie, are in the same state, not too terribly far from each other, but 2 totally different scenes as this hurricane makes landfall.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Reynolds got a long way to go. He's going to continue to get lashed by this storm for the next, say 5 hours or so. So yeah, we did see landfall. It was right here on Cape Lookout. That was about 7:30-ish, but it's kind of taken more of a northeasterly turn. So it almost looks like we're seeing a slightly second landfall potentially taking place over in this area here. Continues to be a strong storm, and you say to yourself, okay, well, hurricanes weaken a lot after they make landfall, don't they? Well, this is the Outer Banks. There's not a lot of elevation here. It's very flat, it's very marshy, and there's a lot of water in this area, so very little weakening is going to be expected, just minor. Let's show you the official update here as of the top of the hour. Hurricane Center putting it out 85 miles per hour. That was the intensity of landfall. That's the intensity right now. It's moving north-northeast at 13 miles per hour, so it will continue to move in that direction throughout the Outer Banks throughout the day for today. The threat of tornadoes, this is something we've been dealing with the last number of hours. We've got a tornado watch in effect for parts of North Carolina into Virginia up towards the Delmarva here, and that's until 11 o'clock local time. There's a lot of friction, a lot of vorticity with these storms, and so as they move onshore, we get those spin-ups, and they can cause a lot of damage. Let's talk about the forecast track here and timing for this thing. It's going to be moving through the mid-Atlantic through the day today, with the peak of it coming into place tonight for you folks, and then the northeast tomorrow with your peak, say sometime late morning to midday-ish, and by Monday morning it's out of here. It's going to be off the center anyway, will be off the U.S.
Gonzalez is in the Weather Center with the details. Hi, Vivian. Hi, Luann. South Florida. Hurricane Irene made landfall right around 7:30 in the morning near Cape Lookout, North Carolina, as a Category 1 hurricane. The main concern now is the flooding, storm surge, and the hurricane-force winds being experienced in the area. But because Hurricane Irene is so large and not expected to remain over land for too long, it will hold on to hurricane status right now, with sustained winds at 85 miles per hour moving towards the northeast at 14 miles per hour, around 5 miles north-northeast of Cape Lookout, North Carolina.
New York, I'm meteorologist Stephanie Abrams. Back to you.
Stephanie, thank you. And a little bit of breaking news to pass along to you. We know that we often get a tornado threat with the landfalling hurricanes, and we do have that new tornado watch. It does include Chesapeake, Virginia, Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, extending now up through Delaware and then southern Jersey as well. So that will be Cape May. Dr. Knabb is with us, and he's been just analyzing everything here from the expert desk. Now tornado threats are stretching far to the north.
That, and also in Virginia, we've seen flood warnings go up. The Blackwater River above Franklin, Virginia. So there's a long period freshwater flooding event that could evolve in certain places, in addition to the storm surge problems that we have.
There's just a lot going on. I mean, if you look at the structure of it, especially the center and then the western side of it, it's beautifully structured. Great banding that's going on with this, but that's causing big problems.
It is. And, you know, one thing.
So 35 minutes past an hour, an update on the storm coming. This is a live picture, West Hampton Beach in New York on Long Island. And I've just gotten this from the National Hurricane Center. It is now forecasting a 4 to 8 foot storm surge for Long Island. And according to the National Hurricane Center director, it, quote, certainly poses risk, unquote, for Long Island Sound. Also along for these dunes along Dune Road as well. What you have to do is take your tide. So if you're at high tide, you add the tide, then you add the surge to that, then you add the waves to that, and you tell me how the dune's going to do. We cannot know yet. But if you're sitting in a house somewhere along in Suffolk County and watching the waves roll in, you need to think about what they would feel like on you, in your home. Because it's possible, according to the National Hurricane Center, it poses a risk, 4 to 8 foot storm surge like nothing we've seen in New York in many, many years. The latest on the storm as it sits right now, the track, the coordinates, and all the rest. Rick Reichmuth is in the Extreme Weather Center. Our chief meteorologist is on standby. What's happening?
Think about all those barrier islands out there, Shepard, that so easily can be topped over. And we've been hearing from the guys that are out in the Outer Banks about some new inlets forming there. That could happen across so many of those barrier islands that are up across parts of Long Island, Fire Island, out where you are, places like the Rockaways. It really could be changing some of that landscape, certainly affecting people's property without a doubt. Here's the satellite imagery. You can see it's a huge storm, a Category 1 storm, but it's big and it's been a stronger storm. So it still has the impacts of a much stronger storm and the impacts that are going to be far-reaching. In fact, right now, take a look at some pictures that are coming out of Chesapeake Beach, Maryland. That's about halfway up the bay here. And I think we've got a live shot showing. Do we have that, Jessica? There you go. This isn't on the coast. This is halfway up the Chesapeake Bay, and they're getting incredible wind, and they're going to be getting storm surge initially into the bay, and then that water is going to funnel out of there as it gets on the back side of the storm. So you see these houses built up on pylons because they know what they potentially can get, but they're about to get a big wallop from this. Go back to the maps here. You can take a look at some of the winds we're seeing. Still gusting at 71 miles an hour in Hatteras. You've been gusting around that range for about the better part of 6 to 8 hours now, so it's very rough. Morehead City, from the west now, you're on the back side of the eye. The eye is now up here. You're on the back side of this, and winds are gusting at 70 miles an hour, so we're pushing hurricane strength, 71 in Cape Hatteras. Go towards the north now. We're in these ranges of the 40s and 50s also, up towards Virginia, in towards parts of the Chesapeake Bay. Big problems as we move forward because of the amount.
All right, thank you so much, Jeff. And we have been looking at the flooding along the sounds there in North Carolina. And initially, as the storm came up, it was pressed along towards the west. Now it's finally beginning to come back on the underside of the storm.
Yeah, in the Pamlico Sound, down in the southern part of eastern North Carolina, and on the radar, we can kind of depict where that's happening. You know, earlier this morning, this tide gauge, which is on the sound side of Cape Hatteras, the water level starting about 8 p.m. last night started to actually drop, and it kept dropping till about noon today because the winds were blowing the ocean into the western parts of the sound. We saw some flooding way out here in the Pamlico River. But now, just in the last hour or so, as the winds have shifted around, those water levels are starting to make a rebound, and eventually they're going to go above normal tide level as the winds blow from the northwest, and you'll get sound side flooding on the Outer Banks. Now, we're just starting the process of causing western sound side flooding up in the Albemarle Sound. Elizabeth City, Edenton, places like that are going to start seeing water level rises.
And then, of course, out over the Atlantic, you've had this incredible fetch for a very long time, a huge wind field, and that is going to coincide with the astronomical tide there in Virginia Beach. This could be very bad in terms of storm surge there.
Extremely concerned about the Hampton Roads area, the lower Chesapeake area, where we've already seen tide gauges above average, and they're headed toward high tide at about the time the center of the hurricane goes over them. We could see 8 to 9 feet of water above ground level in the Hampton Roads area. Storm surge overland is a life-threatening situation. Hopefully people got out.
And on top of that, the center of the storm is going to, if not pass right over them, very close to them. And we have seen people out driving around and goofing off and doing all kinds of stuff there all day long today. I don't think they know what's coming.
No, and the winds we've seen from Eric Fisher's shots have been bad enough, but they're going to get hurricane force winds by dinner time. You got to get indoors.
Absolutely. All right, let's get over to Todd now.
Was only a Category 2, and it was a big wave and surge maker, and it was a major impact. This could have a major impact, even though it's only a big Category 1.
Right. We want to go now to Bill Reed. He's the director of the National Hurricane Center. And Bill, great to see you again. Wondering what you can tell us about the intensity forecast going forward. We've seen this just tremendous outflow pattern once again, a little jet streak coming in across the Midwest. You think the storm is easily going to maintain intensity for a while yet?
Well, intensity forecast is, as you know, is one of our bigger challenges, and given the fact that most of the storm is going to be overland and not going very far offshore, and the rest of its trek up the eastern seaboard, it may be challenged to maintain its high-end speed, but the large size of it and the hurricane force winds extend well out into the ocean there. I think it will take a while for that to spin down, if you will, so the forecast will keep it as a Category 1 hurricane right on to final landfall up in New England tomorrow.
Hey Bill, it's Rick Knabb. I am concerned about storm surge in a lot of different areas. What particular areas have you been talking to emergency managers about that you're particularly concerned about after North Carolina?
Well, the immediate challenge is right here in southeast Virginia, the Tidewater, Norfolk, Hampton Roads area. Water is already building up in the lower Chesapeake, and with this onshore flow, until the storm gets well past there later tonight and tomorrow, there's a chance that we could build up as much as 8 or 9 feet above normal levels there, and that would cause widespread flooding in a lot of low-lying areas.
And Cape Cod would be a problem as well. I mean, all the way up from southeast Virginia, North Carolina, all the way up to New England, we have a storm surge and wave problem, correct?
That's correct. The beach erosion and wave problem on the coast is one thing. The Delaware Bay coastline is going to be another. And then tomorrow, exactly depending on what kind of wind field we have left and the exact track of the storm, we still could see the potential for 4 to 8 feet of storm surge. The Long Island Sound, New York, and then over to the Buzzards Bay, Narragansett Bay area.
And Bill, we've seen some real issues inland with wind in North Carolina, and this is going to continue to be a problem in Virginia, Richmond, up to Baltimore, D.C., right into Philly, and eventually New York as well.
Right. You're seeing the beginning of playing out what we've been concerned about all week. Is a wide swath of 10 inches or so of rain and maybe more. We're approaching 20 inches of rain in places now in eastern North Carolina, estimated.
Well, it's the first hurricane of this Atlantic season, and it's making an impact felt across the mid-Atlantic tonight and will spread to the northeast tomorrow. Irene, on the visible satellite today, you can see a very nice display of center of circulation here that moved up this morning across Cape Lookout down here in the Outer Banks and has moved very close to the Outer Banks all day and is now beginning to reemerge out into the Atlantic waters. Now, the water's not quite as warm up here, but there'll certainly be in a window of time as we head into the evening hours where the system will likely maintain its intensity as a Category 1 storm with 80-mile-per-hour winds. But the rain's all day long, extending off to the north, spreading into New England, into the northeast, and the heavier rains, of course, as you get closer to the center of circulation. Interesting to note, though, the storm system itself will pass well to the east tonight of Washington, D.C., but they won't be out of the woods. We'll probably see 50 to 70-mile-per-hour gusts here in the nation's capital with heavy rains. We've already had a lot of heavy rain as you're moving down I-95 to Richmond, and tonight it's in the Tidewater of Virginia, down here around Norfolk and Virginia Beach, where just in the next few hours they'll feel the strongest winds and certainly wind gusts that come along with Irene. Again, a Category 1 storm. So it's now just moving slowly off to the north-northeast, out across the Atlantic waters, and will continue to head off to the north and eventually brushing the Jersey shore, and we'll see just how close the center of circulation gets into New York City tomorrow. So this will be the area that we're going to watch here in the next few hours as the eye is starting to come up across the the northern edge here out of North Carolina and into the Atlantic waters here, just about 20 miles north.
Now, the rest of the tropics, just want to mention, there's a vigorous tropical wave moving off the African coast. The formation potential is 20% shot over the next 2 days, so we'll be watching that. And some of the computer forecast models are saying that this is going to be developing, so we'll keep our eyes on it.
By for us. And Brian, bring us up to speed. We know we had the latest advisory at the top of the hour, and right now Irene basically drenching the mid-Atlantic states, the Delmarva Peninsula.
Yeah, the center of the hurricane is offshore of the Delmarva Peninsula. In fact, we can kind of make it out on the radar. It's a ragged-looking thing, and I've got good news for where Luke is there. The hurricane is passing by offshore of Delmarva, and it's going to start pushing the water out of Chesapeake Bay. So the tides are very complicated in there, but I think the odds are that they're going to be okay. Here's the center right here. Here's Ocean City, Maryland up there. So the center is going to come very close, but on the back side of this hurricane, the rains are letting up. It's only very gusty wind, and it is going to take time to clear. The real nasty weather is here on the north side of the hurricane. And look at this band here heading into Philly. This is going to provide flooding rains in North Jersey, over in the Philadelphia area, up to the main line toward Norristown, down in Baltimore and Washington. Rain flooding, not storm surge flooding, kind of being pushed up the river. But this rain, which now the back end of it is kind of in Virginia, and this big area of rain is just going to move north, and it's going to take all the overnight and into tomorrow before it clears out of New Jersey, well into tomorrow before it clears, and the ground is already saturated there in Jersey and in Pennsylvania and in New York, and they only needed about 2 inches to get over their flood, to get to flood level, and everything on top of that is all flood. So we are just thinking it's going to be a big, dangerous flood situation.
Brian, just to reiterate, though, you think for the Chesapeake Bay, the surge issues aren't going to be as bad as maybe earlier forecast?
What? Well, we think this is going to still be very bad inland with the heavy rain and flooding, and at the coast we think this is going to still generate this surge of water in that New York, New Jersey area where the points come together there, and along Long Island and on the Jersey Shore. It is still, we still anticipate life-threatening conditions right at the coast. In the high rises on the upper levels, very, very strong winds in the city, and this I think the legacy of this is going to be persistent rain for hours with wind toppling trees all the way from North Carolina all the way to Canada. I think in the end, with some damage along the coast, will be the legacy of Irene.
Brian Norcross at the Weather Channel for us. Brian.
Hurry. So here's where we are right now. Look at the heavy band of rain now moving up from Providence up to Windsor in Connecticut, and here north of Bridgeport, moving up into the Fairfield County area, and then New York City. It's kind of tapered off at the moment there, but that's just because you're in between rain bands there right now. Down to the south, here's that next band, and every band that comes by will be gustier. So here's a band here that is gustier than the one that came through Jersey before. Here's another one in South Jersey from about the south end of Ocean County with the Atlantic County line there, and then rotating down into Delaware. And look at this, in Delaware, it's still raining hard down in Dover, and it's even raining and very windy on the south side. Winds way down in North Carolina, and the center is right in here, by the way. That's the center right there. Way down in North Carolina, still gusting to 68 miles an hour as of an hour ago. So the winds will continue even after the hurricane goes by. We could switch over to Max 3. There you see the wider view. So that's the line right there. Now that line is going to rotate. You can see it. It's kind of rotating toward the city now, and it's going to lift on up north. So we have, of course, we have all flood warnings all through this area. So that's another serious line, and every line that comes is going to be more serious. The one that caused all the heavy rain in New Jersey is now moving on up to the north of New York City. Now let's go farther south, because we have this very interesting thing going on in South Jersey. This is Cape May County. This is Atlantic County, obviously Atlantic City right here. There is the center of the hurricane. What's happening here is the wind is coming in, and it's hitting the shoreline, and it's being kind of diverted to the right, and then other wind is piling up on it. So it's called speed convergence, causing those very heavy storms there on the coast, right inland of the Jersey Shore and down into Cape May County, and very heavy rain here in the southern part of Jersey. And I wanted to show you the back end of the storm just to show you there is some end to this. There it is there. There's the end of the rain, and that's really most of the wind is gone now. Most of the wind is in Virginia. It's really let up a lot in North Carolina, but it's going to take that long. It's going to take a long time tomorrow to get this wind out of here, but the rain is light once the center of the storm goes through. There you see it on the satellite. You see all the dry air down here in that area right there. That's all dry air. So there's the center up there. Okay, it's moved up now. It's just off of Cape May, and it is moving to the north, and it's going to be in the New York City area. How many hours? It's coming up on 4 o'clock. So let's take a look at the latest on the hurricane and what the latest advisory says. 80 miles an hour. Those winds are actually offshore. The center of the hurricane now is up kind of off of Cape May, New Jersey, and the and 195 miles was south-southwest of New York as of 2 o'clock. And that flow around it, like this, is pushing up toward, obviously, the New York area. There was the pressure slowly coming up, indicating a slow weakening, but really not much. And we don't expect much all the way through the U.S. North-northeast at 17 is the wind. So flooding, rains, and coastal water rise, that's our threat. All right, back to Alex.
All right, thank you so much. This is Hurricane.
As the latest on the path and everything that Irene is doing. Dr. Nab?
Hey, good morning, Al and Steph. Here with Brian Norcross, who's been here all night tracking the storm. It's amazing to me that the pressure has only risen so slowly over the last couple of days, and we're dealing with a Category 1 hurricane that only defines really the maximum sustained winds. Everything else about that category is not useful for describing the effects and the size of the storm.
And actually, the size of the storm has grown bigger as the center of the storm has gotten a little weaker. So in terms of the effects, it's actually spread out and more people are affected and will be affected.
Yeah, and interestingly, too, based on all the aircraft data, the maximum sustained winds at the surface are 75 miles an hour to make it a hurricane. But the aircraft data have been showing how the winds increase sharply with height, which has ramifications for as this interacts with the taller buildings and the higher terrain over New England. But maximum winds at the surface 75, that makes it a Category 1 hurricane at the low end. Pressure 958, it was 950 when it went over North Carolina yesterday, moving north-northeast at 18, and the center of circulation going right up the Jersey Shore pretty much all night, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's really been right on track. I thought it was wobbling to the right. It really looks right on track. Really looks right for New York City. And the strongest winds are on the right side. So what you said a moment ago is really important because the strongest winds are aloft on the right side. So Boston will be on the right side. So high-rise buildings in Boston, I think, are really going to be subject to those right side winds.
I'll move along and take a look at the radar if we can get to that. There we go. So here's what is already been happening in the Northeast. The center of circulation is still down to the south of here. And we kind of calculated by the numbers that maybe by 11 a.m. to noon today is when the center of circulation would go very near, if not right over New York City.
Right, that's what it looks like, and where Stephanie and Al are, which is right in there, you see they're in between the bands right now. But this band that's a little farther out on Long Island is a ferocious band, and that's the one they had 2 tornado warnings for, and that's now moving up into the Hudson Valley and southeastern Connecticut, and they have got flood warnings, flash flood warnings, every kind of flood advisory warning that you can have for that area and extending down into New Jersey and Pennsylvania and point south too. I mean, the flooding is a serious thing underway right now.
Okay. More details from here. Let's go back to Al and Steph.
All right.
Look terribly safe.
Don't try that at home.
No. Well, as we continue to track Hurricane Irene on this special edition of Local 10 News, we do have our meteorologists, both Scott Pageant and Michael Smith, covering your weather today.
That's right. We begin with Scott with the latest on Irene.
And Irene is continuing to push its way to the north-northeast, picking up a little bit of forward speed. A lot of rain has been pushing its way in through New York City overnight tonight. Those tropical storm force conditions and winds have already pushed their way into New York City. We've been dealing with it already for 6 hours for the folks up there, and they're not even done yet because the center is going to be making its way closer towards New York City probably by later on this morning. Right now you can see that that center circulation just to the southeast of Atlantic City, right over the open water, has continued to push its way to the north-northeast. Let's take a look at a closer view of how the rain bands continue to push their way on in. A lot of heavy rain has pushed its way into portions of the Big Apple, right along Long Island, Connecticut, Rhode Island. A lot of flooding going on in New Jersey, also stretching its way down through portions of Virginia as Irene pushes its way to the north-northeast now at 18 miles per hour. It's picked up a little bit of forward movement. Winds are sustained at 75 miles per hour, so that's a small decrease compared to the 2 a.m. advisory. They're still gusting, though, up to 90 miles per hour. So with all of that in mind, here's the latest forecast track. Off to the north-northeast, remaining a Category 1 hurricane, possibly downgrading to a strong tropical storm by the time we get to 2 o'clock this afternoon, as it does push its way inland over the New England coastline and then continues to push its way into Canada, remaining a tropical storm. Let's take a look.
Landfall in New York or what?
Well, the center of circulation is going to make landfall not too long from now, within the next hour, hour and a half or so.
I think it'll be New York City an hour and a half, so before that, right?
Oh, yeah. The actual crossing of land could be before that, maybe where Steph has been, near Long Beach. But, you know, Jim, the hurricane force winds extend outward out to 125 miles. In fact, I would suspect that a lot of the strong gust winds are quite a ways away from the circulation center. And so it might be places like Hartford or Providence, for example, that get these really strong bands that mix down some of those stronger winds aloft, and they get maybe the stronger winds on the taller buildings, more so than we'll probably see in New York City.
We just had a wind gust to
64 miles an hour at Providence.
So it's still really going up to the north, but it's really eroding on the south. Although there is a really strong band over from Hagerstown down to the district, down to D.C. So there is a backside to this, Jim. Although it's really dried out, the wind is still blowing, and one really good outer band out there. Look at that down there. I mean, really an enhanced band, although it does seem to be diminishing some. But who's ever under that band, not too far from Washington, D.C., is getting a good blow. And it's you know, easy, having seen this all night here, it's easy 50, 60 miles an hour in gusts down there, and very, very heavy rain.
Absolutely, and now the rain is still spreading well north ahead of the center, and we have some closer in radar views here. Look at how heavy the rain is here over almost all of Connecticut, western and central Massachusetts, and then here in eastern New York, and then it's spreading even farther north than that. Look at all of it, all the way up into Vermont and New Hampshire. All that rain is headed northward, Jim.
Hey guys, I wanted to ask you, when you think about a nor'easter, you're thinking
in some spots, the water is still running off. Take you to one more spot here, because we just had Blue Hill, Massachusetts report in with a 74-mile-per-hour gust, and Milton, Mass just had an 81-mile-per-hour gust. Trees are falling left and right with wind like that. Here's what's going on here. We hadn't had that much wind across parts of New York and Vermont now because we're on this side of the eye. But this is the bad side of the eye, plus there's no friction in the ocean. So the wind just gets to come right off the ocean and plow right into New Hampshire, into Maine, and into Boston. If you're out there in Boston, don't be walking around. This is not the time. You have to let the weather settle down a little bit. Let that wind die off, because trees are falling left and right. You've had a very wet August, and the trees, the roots are just completely saturated, and they're going as fast as I can find them on the reports here. They're coming in one after another, so stay off the streets.
It's dangerous, and just because it hasn't come down yet, doesn't mean it won't come down ever.
Absolutely.
That's right, so be very careful.
Continues to make its way north. Again, we just received, I should say, the latest update. The winds have dropped off slightly to 50 miles per hour, but you're still dealing with a tropical storm. And for the latest, let's send it over to Carl Parker, who's in the expert area, and just at least still dealing with some big-time winds.
Yeah, it's amazing, guys, because you continue to get more and more information as time goes on. You talked about this, about how you get more of a complete picture of the storm as you go through time. And some of the reports that we're getting in here are pretty incredible. We got a report from 3:15 this afternoon in Bristol, that's in Hartford County in Connecticut. Several buildings and homes collapsed. 40 water rescues. 40 water rescues. Main Street becoming a river, flowing fast, several feet deep. 1 to 2 miles of Route 72 underwater, and parts of 72 washed out. So the flooding has been tremendous with this storm. Now there's a look at the storm. Todd, as you say, it's continuing to weaken here, but still a very large and powerful system. And we still have a lot of wind coming around the back side of the system. In fact, in Atlantic City, just a couple of hours ago, winds still gusting to 58 miles an hour. And what's interesting about that is you'll notice that Atlantic City is actually in the sunshine right now, and that's probably part of what's happened here, because you can have a couple of different transport mechanisms. If you have thunderstorms, that will take the stronger wind that's about 3,000 feet off the ground and bring it down to the surface. But if you have sunshine, there's mixing that occurs, and that too can transport those winds down. And you can see how we just broke out in the sun there in southern Jersey. Look at the flow coming around this thing, still coming up there into Narragansett Bay and into Cape Cod, I should say, and into Hyannis. We're getting reports of winds still gusting to 60 miles an hour in Hyannis. So very windy. That's also been the case in eastern parts of Massachusetts into Boston. And there you see that deep convection now lifting up into Maine and northern New Hampshire and Vermont. That's where the heavy rain continues, where we have ongoing problems with water rescues and flash flooding. Here's a look at the radar picture over the last 24 hours. You can see the center of the storm coming right up into New York, actually made landfall in New Jersey. That's the first time we've had a landfalling hurricane in New Jersey since 1903. Then made landfall in New York as a tropical storm. Had it been a hurricane, would have been the first time since 1893. And you can see this incredible rain shield, which stayed intact during the entire life cycle of the storm, from the time that it came onshore in North Carolina and then all the way up the coast. And the problem in a lot of the Northeast, in New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania, Connecticut, was the fact that there was so much water in the ground. Saturated ground means all the water that falls is going to run off and get into the creeks and rivers. Farther north, the ground was not as saturated, but as you know, you've got Adirondacks here, the Catskills, you've got the Green Mountains in Vermont, you've got the White Mountains in New Hampshire, and with all of that mountainous terrain, it channels and funnels the water, and it runs off violently. And we've seen just amazing video from the Northeast, and unfortunately, just terrible things that we've heard about. In fact, Lyndonville actually has been evacuated in Vermont because we have ongoing flooding issues. But at least what we can tell you is that we've got just a few lingering showers.
This is 7 News at 11.
Heavy rain and serious flooding in the Garden State. People there feeling under the weather as they try to navigate out of the danger zone.
Irene sweeping through the Northeast, becoming a wrecking ball in a split second. Powerful winds ripping a tree from its roots, slicing this Maryland home in half.
And now to North Carolina, where the storm first made landfall. Residents waking up to find their communities thrashed. Good evening, everyone. Stripped of hurricane rank, what's left of Irene is now making its way to Canada.
The storm first leaving its mark on the United States. Here is the very latest. At least 21 people killed. At least 4.5 million people without power. And flight cancellations have reached 12,000. But the big worry earlier today was the Big Apple. The night team's Kevin Ozebek is in the Newsplex with the very latest from there. Kevin.
Blake, Irene weakened as she hit the city. Still, though, the storm was a soaker. Tonight, there's major flooding. So in a city that never sleeps, thousands will be spending the night drying out.
Irene turns into a big rainstorm over the Big Apple. As she strikes, there's storm surge in Manhattan. In Queens, homes are hammered. Some city streets are underwater, while others are blocked by blown over trees.
This is a massive tree that came down on that red car there, completely crushed.
On Coney Island, the cleanup already underway. Here, fallen trees tear up sidewalks.
We woke up this morning, we walked down the block, it looked like a tornado had hit.
Before the storm hit, Times Square was empty. Mayor Michael Bloomberg weathered the storm from his Situation Room. He ordered 400,000 New Yorkers to head to safer ground.
I think it's fair to say these conditions make it unsafe to stay outside.
Outside the city, you'll find flooding there too. Boats head out to homes surrounded by water and rescue the stranded.
The water started coming in through the front door, back door. Time to go.
The rush of water so strong in Long Beach, the lifeguard station gets pushed into a pier. In neighboring New Jersey, rivers overran their banks and stretched into the streets. To get around, people have to wade in the water. The flooding is so bad in Trenton, boats, not cars, come down the roads. In Atlantic City, the boardwalk is bare, and now casinos are the unlucky ones. There's debris right outside their front doors. For many, though, Irene was unimpressive. Life is already back to normal for some New Yorkers. But millions are without power, and there's fear the floodwaters will not recede in days.
We're celebrating that it could have been worse, and it could have been worse. But that doesn't mean there wasn't significant damage.
So here's what the city looks like right now. You saw Times Square empty last night. Now taxis, travelers, and New Yorkers are back. Tomorrow, most subway routes will be back up and running, but transit officials say New Yorkers should expect long lines and crowded cars. Live in the Plex, Kevin Ozebek, 7 News 19.
Irene downing trees and power lines in Rhode Island as well. Reporter Craig Boswell live in Newport for us. Craig.
Alexis, good evening to you. Check this out. The trees behind us, you can see the wind has finally died down. Just kind of a light blowing back and forth. But look beyond the trees to the boarded up buildings, the boarded up businesses. That is going to be the story as we move forward, because half of all customers in Rhode Island are without power this evening. And if that continues on into the day tomorrow, the next day, the day after that, the economic impact of this is just going to keep building. It's undetermined when that power is going to come back on. Here it is, the last part of summer. This is an area on an August night that would just be jam-packed with people going up and down the street to the bars, to the businesses, to the restaurants. There's no one on the street. It is pitch black for both directions, any direction that you look. So that's going to be the story going forward. Certainly, though, Irene came in, not the huge monster hurricane, came in as a tropical storm, but it has certainly left its mark here.
Craig, this is not the type of weather event people in that area expect. Is it as bad as what they were expecting, or did they get just kind of what they bargained for?
It wasn't as bad as they had expected. They were expecting the torrential rains to come in this, but since it went off to the west, we got that northeastern quadrant, which is usually the worst part of it. However, in this particular storm, it seemed to dry up. We got that one big band of rain that went through, and then we didn't get those torrential rains. So the low-lying areas didn't flood as much as they thought that they would. Also, with the high tide tonight, the storm surge wasn't as much as they thought it was going to be, so it didn't overtake a lot of those areas and then flood out into the roads. Now, there were plenty of low-lying roads that did flood in low tide, the earlier high tide today, but certainly this evening not as bad as they thought.
All right, thanks. Craig Boswell in Newport, Rhode Island for us.
All right, so now you've seen the damage in the Northeast, but tonight there is much more, and it could have been worse for all of those states had North Carolina not taken the first blow. Irene's most powerful punch socked North Carolina, and with it comes some of the most powerful images. Take a look at Kitty Hawk. This road split and swallowed up by the water, and 35 miles south, a similar scene, a highway unusable. We'll move north to Virginia. Irene's pressure bursting this water main, and this pier split in half. Nearly 1 million people in that state lost power.
I want to tell people they need to be patient. It's going to be a matter of days, or perhaps longer, before power is fully restored.
Maryland, this tree dividing a home into two pieces. In Washington, D.C., a downed tree fortunately spared the National Cathedral. One reporter finding himself in the sea foam.
Early this morning, there were 1 or 2 stragglers, and since then, I haven't seen a soul.
Whoa. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here. Grab the mic.
That's the reason for days on end, emergency officials warn the general public to stay inside. This New Jersey reporter luckier than this boat. And the Garden State's governor assessing the potential damage in dollars.
I got to imagine that the damage estimates are going to be in the billions of dollars, David, if not the tens of billions of dollars.
Here's Pennsylvania, streets flooded in Philadelphia.
It's amazing. There's some amazing stuff that happened around here.
We could show you video for hours, but we'll end in Vermont. This river rising, the water rushing. And as you heard Craig there in Rhode Island tonight, the damage all across a little less than actually anticipated. One expert, though, putting that figure tonight for the entire seaboard, somewhere around $7 billion. Well, our team coverage continues now with meteorologist Brent Cameron, and as of 11 o'clock, Irene is done. Is that correct, Brent?
That is, after many, many days of tracking Irene, the last advisory written just a few moments ago on the former hurricane and now former tropical storm. The tropical characteristics just about gone due to the length of time it has been spending now over land. Here's the 11 o'clock advisory. Now, it still has winds of 50, and some of those high wind speeds will spread across our borders over into Canada overnight tonight. It is moving quickly to the north and northeast at 26 miles per hour. The good news for the Northeast, all of New England, the rain is just about gone after the big drenching both yesterday and today. We watched all those heavy rains come down from the middle Atlantic onto the north. Now we're watching this system, Jose, latest tropical storm. Here's the latest information on it. The 11 o'clock advisory still north of Bermuda. It's continuing to move to the north over the open waters, the cooler waters of the Atlantic, and it's most likely going to dissipate by late tomorrow. This one may form by late tomorrow off from the eastern Atlantic, a near 100% chance that this could become tropical depression number 11 or the next storm. And we've put together the latest model runs. These are very preliminary, and over the next 5 days it's still going to remain very much over the waters of the Atlantic. I'll have a lot more on the tropics in your entire forecast in a few minutes.